Okay, hello everyone. Good morning for this second day of the CARLA 2020 conference. For us, it's a pleasure to start this new day. So let me to invite and introduce Luis Eliezer Cadenas. He is the executive director of the Red Clara Consortium. That is the most important consortium of the academic network here in Latin America. And today, Luis Eliezer said us a few words to welcome this day of the conference. Thank you very much, Luis Eliezer.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you everybody for this invitation to open this second session of CARLA 2020. Sorry, yesterday I missed the opportunity to participate with you in the opening of the event. However, you know that we have the TICAL event simultaneously because we were planning at the beginning of this year, at the end of the other year, to have this activity in presence together in Cuenca. Since for Red Clara is quite important, the relationship with the HPC capacities in Latin America and with Escalac and with all you guys in these capacities that we have in Latin America, we need to work together in order to take advantage of the opportunities we have to support science, education, and technology in the region. So I am more than proud of being here with you. Happy to welcome the people who is attending this event. It is something that is amazing that we can keep the activity even against the situation that we have lived this year. No? So congratulations for this event. I know that it has been very successful yesterday, and I am sure that it's going to continue in this way. And I invite all the people who is hearing me to participate actively in the presentations that you are going to see today. So thank you very much for the invitation to open this day, Carlos and Cedia also, the virtual host of this activity. And I hope you have a very useful and an interesting day. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Luis Eliezer. So now I invite Professor Harold Castro from Universidad de los Andes in Colombia. He is the chair of the first session of this morning in CARLA 2020, Cuenca Virtual. Welcome, Harold, please.
Thank you, Carlos, and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to me to present this first keynote of the day. And we are very glad to have wonderful speakers for this morning. It's my pleasure to introduce Nicholas Nystrom and Paola Buitrago from the Pittsburgh Advanced Computing Center. They are the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center is a joint research center of Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh, and they are leading wonderful projects on the convergence of HPC and artificial intelligence, which I remember is the topic of this CARLA 2020. So we are very, very happy to have them here. And they are very close to CARLA because they have participated in previous editions. So I want to say just thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Paola, for coming, for being here. Nicholas is chief scientist at the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center, and Paola is leading the artificial intelligence and big data group also at the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center. And they are going to talk today about the projects they are involved in, and particularly the new architectures and systems that they are designing and implementing to accelerate the convergence between artificial intelligence and HPC. So that's it. Thank you, Nick and Paola. So please, the floor is yours.
Yeah.
Nick, you are still on mute.
Thank you. Harold, thank you very much. And thank you to all of the organizers for this wonderful opportunity. CARLA is, I think, one of my favorite conferences every year, the highest quality talks, the greatest conversations. I really wish we could meet in person, and I hope we can get back to that next year. So as soon as I will find my screen share button, I will begin sharing. Okay. How long do I have, Harold?
So we have 1 hour to this 1 hour for your talk, and then we can have at least 20 minutes for questions from the audience.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So good morning, everybody. My name is Nystrom, or Nicholas Nystrom. I am, as Harold said, Chief Scientist at PSC. And Paola Buitrago, who is the co-author of this talk, is the Director of AI and Big Data. We've decided that I will present today to keep things flowing rapidly rather than handing it off. Excuse me. And we're also leading a number of the major initiatives at the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center. One of those is Bridges. I've mentioned that in previous CARLAs, so some of you may be familiar with it. We're launching 2 new supercomputers next month, Bridges 2 and Neocortex. I am PI for Principal Investigator for Bridges 2. Paola is Principal Investigator for Neocortex. We also lead a number of other projects, and we'll talk about at least one of them in this session. I'm looking forward to questions at the end. Please keep those in mind. So what I'm going to cover today is first, why AI? Why do we care about this? We come from a world of HPC and supercomputing. Why do we suddenly care so deeply about scalable AI, and how does that intersect high-performance computing? I'll then jump into the massive computational demands. So once we show why AI is important to us at a very transformative level, why is it so computation hungry? And why do we need HPC? Why isn't a desktop GPU enough? Then I'll then switch to our ecosystem we've been building for several years now, since about 2014. The transition from Bridges to Bridges 2, a new big data program called the Human Biomolecular Atlas that we just debuted on September 1st, a couple of days ago. And then I really want to focus in this talk on Neocortex, because that's what's really exciting. It is the most audacious hardware advance that I've seen in my history of high performance computing. That's over 3 decades. And then go into some examples. And because it's timely, I want to show a few examples of how we're applying these ideas to COVID-19 research. And hopefully, once the pandemic gets under control, we can meet again next year in person. And then a quick summary. So first, why AI? I want to show you a few examples of things that are happening that are fundamentally changing the way people do research at a very large scale, and are really changing things. I want to start with one in quantum chemistry. And there are several reasons for that. One is that it's actually what my own advanced degree was in, so I understand it. When I went to graduate school, coupled cluster theory is a way of addressing electron correlation. So actually looking in detail how electrons behave in a quantum mechanical sense, for those who are not in this field, and really looking at higher order correlation. There are a whole tier of methods. Coupled cluster with singles and doubles, or CCSD with triples in parentheses, means those are treated perturbatively, is really regarded as the gold standard. It approaches chemical accuracy for systems of interest. The problem is that it is expensive. The scaling in terms of compute cost is n to the 7th, where n is the number of electrons in the system. So as you go to larger chemical systems with more atoms, you just can't do it. When I got my degree, we did a couple CCSDT for a couple of light atoms, very small systems. Now it's being done for systems of relevance to COVID-19 and drug discovery. What's the difference? The difference is the development of neural network potentials, or these ANI potentials, ANI, that stands for Accurate Neural Network Engines for Molecular Energies. And I've included references throughout this talk for people who'd like to learn more. The idea here, though, is by training a neural network on a number of inexpensive DFT calculations that are run on supercomputers at places like Los Alamos and Argonne National Laboratory. Millions of data points are obtained. Those are used to train a network that informs deep learning potentials. There are downsampling schemes to make this more efficient and to increase the accuracy. There have been multiple iterations of this already. This is moving very fast. The current state of the art are these ANI 1CXX potentials, and these approach CCSDT accuracy for things like energies and torsions and vibrations. But what's important about them, what's really exciting, is the calculations that used to take 24 hours on the CPU can now be done in 2 microseconds on the GPU with inferencing using these neural network potentials. This is over a billion-fold speed up, and this changes what is possible. Another example, this is one that we went to detail last year at CARLA in Costa Rica. And I just want to summarize it here for those who were not here, because this is a great example of things that are super important. This is in medical imaging, and the challenge here is to develop neural networks for 2 different types of image classification. One is on recognizing tumors. In image A, we have the tumor outline drawn by a human expert pathologist. In B, we have a heat map of where the cancer is likely to be. In C, we have a heat map of where these tumor infiltrating lymphocytes, or white blood cells, that can be activated to destroy the tumor cells are located. And then D is a combined heat map of both. The key here, though, is that these are very large images. These are what are called whole slide images. And these can be 100,000 by 100,000 pixels and 4 gigabytes in size each. This requires training large-scale convolutional neural networks independently for the cancer segmentation and the TILS segmentation, and then putting it together. The reason for doing this is that by understanding where an individual patient's TILs are located within their tumor, this can recommend whether they are or are not a candidate for precision immunotherapy. And if they are, that's a much less invasive, less harmful way of treating them than surgery or chemotherapy or radiation. These require large memory networks, very fast nodes, and this was awarded the HPC Wire Reader's Choice Award for the best use of HPC in the life sciences. That happened last November, so somewhat after the CARLA conference. It's just really exciting work that can help patients have better outcomes. A second example I want to show briefly, and this is important because this is a different kind of AI, and this really shows the importance of scale. This was a competition using the card game of poker as a surrogate for real-world situations where one does not have complete information. And those real-world situations are things like auctions, medical treatment planning with stem cell therapies, negotiation, economics, and many others where information is not complete, where it's changing, and where there are adversaries, such as in the stem cell case, one's body adapts. And there are adversaries that adapt to one's changing strategy. This was a whole series of successes I detailed last year. But what's significant at the end of the year was they actually made the science journals list of the most important breakthroughs of the year. And the point of this was that this was an AI approach, and what made that possible was massive computing. Until recently, with some of our COVID work, this was the single largest user of compute on our Bridges supercomputer. It had used over 19 million core hours and generated a knowledge base of over 2 petabytes. And the breakthroughs that made this possible relative to previous generations that had not achieved parity with human expertise was that massive amount of computing. That's gone on to inform smaller, lighter weight models that can run on much smaller systems. And it illustrates the convergence of HPC and AI and why that's important. And the final example I want to show to motivate the rest of why we're doing what we're doing is surrogate models for simulation and modeling. There's a lot of talk about this. I think this paper from Kasim and others at Livermore and other places, developing a network called DENSE, is really a great showcase of what is possible. In this paper, they look at a number of cases from global circulation models for climate and a number of others. The point is that by building these models and then substituting computationally expensive physics calculations by inferencing at runtime, people are routinely observing speedups of factors of 4 to 9 orders of magnitude. And that's a game changer. That's beyond what has been possible with Moore's law. It's beyond what has been possible with other incremental algorithmic advances. And it makes bigger science possible. It brings it in. For things like global climate, for medicine, being able to do things 1 billion times faster is a game changer. And I really look forward to what this will make possible to help society, health, sustainability, and the environment. What we have here are 2 results from a global circulation model. And this was a science article written about this preprint. So from this GCM simulation to the emulator, visually, I don't see any difference other than color. Plotting the halo and the power spectrum, you can see, in fact, the simulation and the emulator overlap almost identically until you get to this very tail down at essentially near the poles. So the results are outstanding. We're speeding things up by a factor of 1 billion. And that's the reason to really look hard at integrating AI with simulation and with other forms of research. What that needs is 2 things. It needs, in many cases like this, it needs a lot of HPC to develop the data on which to train. In some cases, that could be online or live. It can continue learning. It also needs massive resources to do the training. And I'd like to speak to some extent about both of those. Now, for AI, why does it need so much compute? And Paola put together these great slides on the motivation. So we think of, at a very high level, we think of AI or machine learning as fairly simple. You start with data, you apply some machine learning, and you get intelligence or knowledge out of it. It's actually much more complicated than that. We start with raw data. We do a lot of pre-processing. We get data. We apply some machine learning method, but that is itself a complicated process. We have to do feature engineering. We have to choose or develop a model and its parameters. We have to optimize those parameters, evaluate how well it did. And in many cases, that's iterative. So we do this many times. Eventually, we get a model that works. We can process that and deploy it. There's a lot of work that goes into this. There's a lot of computation. Every year at the end of the year, the Stanford AI Index comes out and it looks at the state of the field of artificial intelligence. One of the significant results in the index that came out last December is that prior to 2012, AI computation demands pretty much tracked Moore's law, and that was okay. Once Alex Krizhevsky showed the power of convolutional neural nets for image classification, that's when deep learning took off. And ever since then, deep learning compute requirements have been doubling every 3.4 months, which is radically steeper than doubling every 19 months, as Moore's law says. And clearly, we have to do something smarter. why is that happening? There are two reasons. One is on the left, this plot is just a look at convolutional neural nets. It's from a paper by Bianco and collaborators, and this paper is occasionally updated, so it's worth checking out. The vertical axis is accuracy of these convolutional neural nets, or CNNs. The horizontal axis is number of gigaflops per forward pass. And so in general, accuracy goes up as the number of flops goes up with complexity. And then the area of each circle is proportional to the number of parameters in the model. That has to do with both computational complexity and memory footprint in fairly complicated ways. That's convolutional nets. That's typically used for computer vision, classification, segmentation, and so on. And it also there's overlap with graph networks. There's another class of networks called transformers and attention networks. These are used for time sequences. So speech, machine translation, natural language processing, and natural language understanding. This is where things have really been exploding. When BERT came out, it was thought of as enormous. And at some point, Google switched to BERT for powering parts of their search engine. It had 340 million parameters. This was October 2018, less than 2 years ago. Since then, the number of parameters that you can see has been increasing, not linearly with time. There's some back and forth, but overall has been increasing rapidly. The newest network that has received a lot of press is GPT-3, where GPT stands for generative pre-training. And this network from OpenAI has 175 billion parameters. That's enormous. What's more daunting is that it required 3 times 10 to the 23rd flops to train. That's 10 petaflop years. That's just prohibitive. And using conventional technologies, that's beyond the reach of science. We also know that scientific networks have a lot of requirements that are different than these industrial networks. On top of that, we have additional sources of complexity. So things like generative adversarial networks, where two networks doing discrimination and generation compete iteratively, means many more cycles, domain adaptation, reinforcement learning, capsule networks. These all increase complexity to get better accuracy, to represent hierarchies, and so on. And so we need to do something better than we've been doing, both to get scientific results and to manage the energy footprint of these massive calculations. I also want to point out that the optimizations are hard. This is from a paper from a colleague of mine, Barnabas Pochos, and Eric Xing and others. And it's really looking at automated ways of developing neural networks that are more accurate than the ones you always hear about, like ResNet and like VGG and like GPT. And this is a machine learning approach to generate machine learning models. And what you see on the right are some of the models generated in this paper from almost 2 years ago now. And what's significant is that these are very different than the very regular models that are commonly in the literature. They produce better results. And this is not unusual in the history of machine learning, that an optimized model can be developed that is different than human intuition. It also takes a lot of compute to do this. So I want to jump ahead now to the ecosystems we've been building to enable this kind of work. So the first one is bridges. Let me pause. I just want to say a few words for those who are not familiar with the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center. So we are, as Harold said, a joint effort of Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh. The center was founded in 1986. So over 34 years of leadership in HPC, high performance data analytics, and computation. Sorry if you hear barking in the background. And we offer a number of services and resources. The first are large systems. So systems like Bridges and Bridges 2 that we'll talk about here. Neocortex I'll talk about. Anton is a purpose-built system for molecular dynamics. We also lead many research projects. We have about 30 active projects at a given time. They come and go. One is a Human Biomolecular Atlas project. I'll be talking about that. We have the Brain Image Library, Center for Multi-Scale Modeling of Biological Systems, and so on. We lead a lot of training. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on education training, but what I will say is we lead these national workshops for a US organization called Exceed. We typically have up to about 25 institutions participating in each. We've recently switched to doing those over Zoom because of the webinar, because people can't meet in person. Absolutely, if anyone in this audience would like to participate, please let us know. We'll send you information on getting involved. We'd be happy to have you. We helped with the summer school in Brazil last January. We do a lot of research with our universities. We do a lot with networking and security, and we do a lot with translational research in looking to find ways to help companies leverage what we have available and get real results out to real people. So I want to jump back and look to machines like Bridges and Bridges 2. So first of all, where we really are looking now is enabling rapidly evolving research. And so what we mean by that is a combination of things. First is that high performance computing and high throughput computing continue to be important. They always will be. But on top of that, we have high performance AI or HPAI and the AI enhanced simulation modeling that I described at the start of this talk. Those are equal in my mind, and the blue bubble is growing. We have community data. We'll talk about that. The point here, though, is making data available as an energy source for research, to really democratize research, to let people participate from wherever they are, where all they need is an internet connection. It takes away the requirement to be at a top-tier research university, to have access to expensive instruments, making data available and the tools and software next to that data, that's big data as a service, really lets everyone participate and will move us farther faster. Really prioritizing ease of use, familiar software, interactivity, and human productivity is key. I understand the leadership computing mindset of running a massive simulation on a machine like Summit in the US or others elsewhere in the world. That tends to be hard to do. We're really focused on an intermediate scale where balancing human ease of use with massive compute is the best way forward. And then tying it all together with high performance computing, AI, and data, supporting workflows for provenance, reproducibility, like Paola talked about yesterday, embracing heterogeneous computing, and bridging over to public clouds. So we started all of that with Bridges 1. We moved it forward to Bridges 2. I just want a quick snapshot of what Bridges 1 was. This is an old system now. We stood it up in January of 2016. It had about 30,000 Xeon cores, a lot of NVIDIA GPUs of several generations. We started with K80s, added P100s, and then with Bridges AI, which was a new supplement we added in 2019, we added a number of voltas and a DGX2. It had a lot of storage, still does. It has a lot of memory with up to 12 terabytes per node, and we make a lot of this available. One of the keys to everything I'm talking about today is with Bridges, Bridges 2, Neocortex. These are all absolutely free of cost for open research. So no charge whatsoever. These are already paid by our tax dollars. And we can work essentially with anyone, principal investigators for allocations on all of these systems. Because they're US federally funded systems, the principal investigators have to be at a US institution, but their collaborators can be anywhere. And we have many that are worldwide. We can help with establishing collaborations. In some cases, we can be the collaborator. So if any of this is of interest, keep that in mind and reach out to us and we'll be happy to find a way forward. So Bridges has served to date over 2,100 projects and over 20,000 users at over 800 institutions. And I would say these are the PIs we're aware of for their institutions. Their collaborators are many more than that. And significantly, it's spanned over 121 fields of study. And that's things like the traditional chemistry, physics, and fluid dynamics, but it's also all the new things. It's bioinformatics, genomics, social sciences, business, neuroscience, and that's what's designed to make possible. So the architecture, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, other than to say it really embraced heterogeneity, bringing together many different types of nodes so that different parts of a problem can all be done on one system. One can do data wrangling, pre-processing, simulation modeling, AI, integrating HPC, Spark, and Hadoop even, and then doing the post-processing and putting it all together onto one system. And that's what we did with Bridges 1. We're carrying that forward into Bridges 2, make it bigger and better. One of the things we did with Bridges 1 last year was to introduce Bridges AI, which includes an NVIDIA DGX2 because we perceived the need for doing really large-scale capability training, as we talked about. And then a number of HPE Apollo 6500 servers. The point of the DGX2 is with 16 32 gigabyte voltas. That's where it could do the biggest training on the planet at that time in a single system. And then the Apollos balance that. They have 8 volts each instead of 16. These have a bit less memory per GPU. And so this gave us a lot of capacity for the people that need that. And it's been a good balance over time. We're carrying this forward into Bridges 2. So what I want to say is Bridges 2 was awarded last year, and we're building it this year. That gap is so we can capture the most relevant technologies for the next several years. It's a $10 million US acquisition. On top of that is an additional $2.5 million per year for operations and maintenance. So we expect the full award to be at least $22.5 million. This was the title of the project. It's really about this rapidly evolving science and engineering research and bringing together computing, data, and analytics. HPE is our vendor for really all of these systems. So what I want to say about Bridges is that we installed it. We then installed a full ecosystem around it. We started building large data sets. This goes back to what I said about using data to democratize research and to provide big data as a service. We first built a file system around biology and machine learning collaborations. This was really aimed at breast cancer and lung cancer research. It was about 2.2 petabytes. We then added the brain image library. This is a leading collection of very high resolution brain imaging of different modalities of mouse, rat, marmoset, and moving toward human. And it is currently about 15 petabytes. We federated campus clusters with it from our own campuses, Carnegie Mellon and University of Pittsburgh, West Virginia University. And the point there is basically to build a cloud environment, to leverage what we have in data, and to let them go further. We added Bridges AI that was in January 2019 and entered production, and we federated HUBMAP. I'll talk more about that. Now, all of these were a bet on the future. They were a bet that we would be able to follow Bridges with some other system of that scale so that all of these big data projects, because these 4 are all about data, would be able to continue having a home. When Bridges 2 was funded, we are going to move all of that over. So Bridges AI, we will move over at the end of this year. These individual projects we also expect to move. And the point is they will be able to leverage this much more modern, stronger, more advanced computer architecture for the next 5+ years. So in Bridges, we really looked at pioneering the convergence of HPC AI and data. We added Bridges AI. We had a new network at the time. It was called Intel OmniPath. And we built this ecosystem. It's had a lot of impact. Bridges Bridges 2 carries all of that forward. We now have full system AI. So we have these massive AMD CPUs with 64 cores each, on which is very natural to think about putting inferencing alongside simulation modeling. We have a flash array with 9 million IOPS, specifically for deep learning training and potentially some genomics. We have HDR 200 InfiniBand throughout, so we've doubled the bandwidth throughout the whole system, and we've quadrupled it between our AI nodes. PCI Gen 4 lets us exploit that. That comes with the AMD CPUs. We have better data resilience, tiered data management in a very user-friendly way, better power efficiency because that's important, and expanding our cloud interoperability. So I'm not going to go through this slide in a lot of detail. It's too much information. I will certainly be happy to share the slides with the organizers to distribute after the conference or after my talk. But the real innovations beyond Bridges 1. So these were Bridges 1, and then where we're going beyond that are the right-hand column. So it's CPUs, it's scaling AI to up to 192 V100 GPUs in a very strong sense. Introducing a flash tier of storage for, especially for training, radically increasing bandwidth, introducing this cluster store E1000 storage system that was a Cray product, is now an HPE product, and then using the HPE Data Management Framework, or DMF, to manage storage. The things we really do to make this usable, they're different than a supercomputer, are we prioritize interactivity. There's a command called interact, so you can just get on nodes of your choosing. They could be normal CPU nodes, they could be GPU, they could be AI, and you could do things for debugging, for development, for developing models, for visualization. And that's a game changer relative just to batch submissions. We support all of the language and frameworks people want, so Python, Anaconda, the frameworks like TensorFlow, PyTorch, Caffe, and so on. We support containers. Right now, that's Singularity. Moving forward, we're looking to improving support for Docker and virtual machines, especially for hosting web services. We have nodes that are dedicated for hosting databases. And that supports, again, the web portals, but also sophisticated data management and workflows. And then, of course, we have a large collection of applications and libraries. A lot of users come to us saying they'd like a VM to run whatever their favorite application is. And in fact, they don't even need the VM. We just have it. It's much easier for them. It runs faster. And it's a win-win. Two of the examples are just the one I mentioned before from Dr. Saltz and Gupta at Stony Brook on cancer. And then some great work using scalable AI from Elio Huerta at University of Illinois, look at classifying galaxies. So the things that make this usable, one of the important parts is really having all the frameworks. And that's having everything there. We implement a lot of these through the NVIDIA GPU containers, but people can also build their own through, ideally, Anaconda. The community data sets we've talked about, I'm not going to say a lot more other than emphasizing this is really a way to, if we can make data available, especially where it's big, tens of terabytes through petabytes, it's a way of building communities and letting a lot of people work together in ways that otherwise would be impossible. The architecture Bridges 2 looks like this. There's one common interconnect. It's Mellanox HDR 200. It ties together all nodes, so everything can get all of the data equally. That's key. The storage is in purple. There's the flash array. It's 9 million IOPS. It's actually way more than 100 terabytes usable, and about 100 gigabytes per second. The disk file system is 15 petabytes usable, about 130 to 140 gigabytes per second bandwidth. And then that is managed over with HPE DMF in a file system we call Ocean because it is big and deep and we want people not to pollute it, that connects to the tape backup. That tape backup is right now about 8.6 petabytes, but that's expandable. So if another project comes along and needs another 10 petabytes, we can accommodate that in a very cost-effective way. The compute nodes are in green. We have 488 that we call regular memory. These have two 64-core CPUs, 256 gigabytes of RAM, and actually 2 tiers of SSDs, this and double this. There are large memory with twice the memory, otherwise the same. There are extreme memory with 4 terabytes of RAM. These are really great nodes for doing things like genome sequence assembly, graph analytics, and other things where you can't partition the data. And then the GPU nodes, we have 24 of those in Bridges 2. Each one has 8 V100, 32 gigabyte SXM, so NVLink connected GPUs. A lot of GPU memory, 384 to 768 gigabytes of RAM. For AI, they will all be 768. So they're really strong nodes. These are each actually coupled by 2 links of HDR200 InfiniBand, so 400 gigabits per second. And one can use GPU Direct, so that really scales out nicely. Then a lot of nodes for web servers, databases, data transfers, and so on. The topology is a leaf spine topology. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But the point is that there's a lot of expandability here. The top switches are they're not fully subscribed. And so this is how we're also going to bring in other systems like Neocortex and the other data systems we mentioned. And the key here is multiple links between the GPU nodes. This chart of what all the nodes are, this is for your reference. This will be in a slide deck. I'm not going to go through it here. I'm not going to go through the node types in a lot of detail either. I want them to be here for people that may want to use these systems. I could see what's here. The main point of the regular memory nodes is really having these AMD Rome 7742 CPUs. These are turning up in a lot of HPC systems now, and they really offer tremendous performance, some great security enhancements, and with 64 cores, there's a lot of flexibility here. They're 2.25 to 3.4 gigahertz. One can use all the cores, doing a lot of arithmetic, running a lower clock, or use fewer, and it will clock itself up. And it provides a lot of flexibility, including for real-time inferencing. The performance we've seen, we've done benchmarking relative to our targets, and it's been doing extremely well on all of them. We'll be publishing performance after we build Bridges 2 and scale things up. The extreme memory nodes are Intel-based, and these each have 4 terabytes of RAM. These are all, I should just mention, HPE servers. The GPU nodes are the next generation of Apollo 6500s. Again, really designed for scalable AI. And we've increased the memory to 768 for the AI nodes. The interconnect of those nodes, you remember the overall topology was the leaf spine. This is just zooming down to that bottom level. And we've found this is useful for scaling deep learning training across nodes, such as you would do with Horovod or other methods. The file system is designed to be scalable. We have the disk and flash on the left, the tape on the right. It is the disk and the tape that are federated with the HPE DMF. We also have this flash array, and that will be used on a more ephemeral basis for training big data sets for genomics, potentially for memory databases, and so on. Going back to why the system is going to be usable, it's all about productivity, usability, and interoperability. This slide brings it all together, looking at multimodal data and these non-traditional communities, and then tying it there with Bridges 2, community data, big data as a service, and the data framework. The whole system being an AI engine is going to help immensely with this idea we had at the beginning with surrogate models and AI-enabled simulation. Being able to do sim and mod, do training online or offline, do inferencing on the fly, and potentially doing that all iteratively. Usability comes from the software, the containers, the frameworks, the fact that it's all there and all supported. And the interoperability is with other big data sets like the Brain Image Library and HUBMAP. Universities, I've just shown ours because it's easy, but others are equally accessible. And then public clouds like Amazon and Google. The kinds of science we'll make available are across the board. It's to look at genomics, digital pathology, the example I showed illustrated that. Immunity, obviously, COVID-19 is a great example that's timely, and so on. It really is very general purpose. I want to go very quickly over the next project. And this one's exciting because it is an example of the big data as a service. And it's very timely because we just debuted our data release on September 1st. So it's called the Human Biomolecular Atlas, or HUBMAP. And its point is to provide an atlas, or to create an atlas and a framework for people to contribute to the atlas of the human body of all major tissues at cellular resolution. This does not exist yet before HUBMAP. There were bulk atlases. There were other ones that started to go in this direction. The Human Cell Atlas is definitely going in this direction as well. We are working with them, but we are leveraging in the HUBMAP a number of single cell technologies that didn't exist 2 years ago. And the developers, many of those, are part of our HUBMAP consortium. So this is really going to be the new baseline, we hope, for medical knowledge. It will be the single cell database of what normal adult human tissue looks like, and over time, younger people's tissue as well, against which other data on disease can be compared. We understand cell types and how they interact, how they function, how disease happens, what goes wrong in signaling pathways, for example. We have 18 components in HUBMAP, 19 lead institutions, and it is generating a lot of data. Over 30 assay types we have mapped out now. More are coming online this fall. Many tissue types. It's going to be growing rapidly. What we have right now is 7 types of organs: small intestine, kidney, spleen, lymph nodes, heart, large intestine, thymus. From 33 donors, several hundred data sets, many different modalities. There's a common coordinate framework to allow one to do analytics between different data sets from different subjects or donors, recognizing we're all of different sizes and shapes. This is an illustration of what's in the portal now from Kati Borner's group at Indiana. And they and Rahul Satija at New York Genome Center are developing additional CCFs for additional organs as we speak. A view of the kind of data we're making available is here. We have a number of data types. One can search on organs, on the specimen types, and so on. This is just the top of the web portal. So there's a lot here. This data is mostly all public. Some of it is protected under a data use agreement. But the vision is that anyone in the world can use it for science. The HUBMAP portal includes a wonderful visualization tool for looking at single cell spatial data. It is a tool called Vitesse from Nils Gellenborg and his team at Harvard Medical School. And this is just a movie they made and shared recently of using the tool to look at different data, cell segmentations, drilling down, being able to see individual genes firing within single cells, and look at all sorts of things with it. The idea here is that pulling all the data to users' sites would be prohibitive, but by putting the tools like the Common Coordinate Framework, the exploration user interface that Kati's group made in Indiana to navigate and find what you want, and tools like Vitesse here to navigate the data in a data viz way, let people work with the data in place, select what they want. If they want to download it, that's possible. But our real vision is they'll be able to do it right here in the HUBMAP portal and do most of the science they need. Everything is being tracked. We have a graph database tracking provenance for original derived data. We have DOIs for data entities. This really speaks to a lot of the great points that Barali made up or brought up yesterday. And we're looking for reproducibility in this sort of science. So I just want to say the portal URL is up here. Please go try it out. Let us know what you think. So I'll jump now into what I think is a very exciting part of this talk, and that's Neocortex. This is a project for which Paola is the PI, and it is about, in a nutshell, it is about accelerating deep learning training by a factor of 1,000. And that's the best way I can sum it up. It's about taking training that used to take days, weeks, months, or just be impractical to even begin, and making that take hours or minutes, maybe even be interactive. And the point of that is to let people try more things out, to develop ideas, to develop better models, get higher accuracy, and advance science, rather than being constrained waiting for GPUs, or rather than worrying about their cloud budget or credits, let them go 1,000 times faster, depending on the problem. There are two quotes that Paola had here from Jan LeCun from last year. The first speaks to hardware capabilities, and that is that hardware capabilities both motivate and limit the ideas that we can pursue. They motivate them because as we get better hardware, we can do more. But people are constrained by what they can do at the time. And that's a problem. We would like people to forget about their constraints. Imagine what you really want to do. What would let you discover the next cure for a rare disease? What would let you understand some important factor that is key to our climate balance and not worry about what the compute cost will be? And then we look to our systems and decide, can we do it? And possibly we can. That's the goal. And so Jan's second question is, deep learning specific hardware really necessary? And the answer to that is yes. For those who don't know Jan LeCun, he was one of the real founders of modern deep learning. And he's currently, I believe, chief scientist and VP at Facebook, where he could do this at scale. The point of his second quote is that by having purpose-built hardware that's not general purpose, is not brought from a different domain, like graphics or gaming or something else, one can optimize that hardware. One can design it from the ground up for doing neural networks, to exploit things like sparsity, and to do things faster in a more energy efficient way, and to make bigger problems possible. And that's the vision here. So we proposed last year a new project called Neocortex. This is another NSF award. This is it's a different category called innovative. So these are designed to look at very cutting edge, high risk, high reward systems to understand what will help science move forward. Like Bridges 2, there will be a separate budget for operations and management. That'll be another $6.25 million. So this will be at least 11.25 million total. It is a collaboration. Of course, PSC, Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center, is leading it. Our collaborators are Cerebras Systems, who you may have read about, and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Cerebras and HPE are deploying the system, or delivering the system, but this is a research collaboration. So part of our project is a collaboration between PSC, Cerebras, and HP Labs to look at scaling AI. For those familiar with Cerebras, it is the most powerful AI system ever built. It's been getting a lot of press recently. It's installed at certain other places. But as big as it is, as we'll describe it, and as wonderful as it is, there will always be problems that are bigger. It goes back to the initial slides on computational complexity that I showed. There will always be something that won't fit any one system. And so our research collaboration is looking at how do we efficiently not only use a CS1 for problems of interest to scientific research, but also how can we scale those problems across multiple CS1 systems? So who is Neocortex designed for? The easiest way to describe that is people doing demanding deep learning training. The more demanding your training, the better it will be. If you're doing something that you can train in 30 seconds on a laptop, you don't need this. If you're doing something for which you have to wait for training to happen, you'd like to do more, whether that training takes hours, days, weeks, months, or is beyond reach, this is a good fit. Some examples are medical imaging, like we showed with the precision immunotherapy, training data sets for astrophysics and cosmology, weather and climate, genomics, and other sciences. Building these big surrogate models, all of these could be good fits. We are looking to support very early on different types of LSTM networks, graph convolutional networks, medical networks, and others. And more will be coming very rapidly moving forward. And there are a number of other pieces of guidance we'd have that I'm not going to go into here. And these are for when we begin later this year. So what we'd like to do is vastly shorten the time required for deep learning training. And by vastly, I mean by at least factors of hundreds, to foster the integration of deep learning with science and science workflows. And then really to provide this revolutionary new hardware that we'll talk about as a way of looking at this may have potential for other things too. It may not just be deep learning. This is a scale of hardware architecture that is unprecedented since I've been doing HPC, and it could be a game changer. We're offering this, as I've said, at no cost to the open science community, PIs within the US and their international collaborators. So that's very wide. And if it's not open science, if it's a company looking to develop something that's proprietary, we expect to be able to support that too. So we named it Neocortex because the neocortex is a part of the brain that's evolved most recently and is attributed to a lot of higher order function, like visual processing, hearing, really discerning what's going on, a lot of the higher thought that we do as humans. It's thought to be what makes us different from other animals that don't have a developed neocortex. And so for an AI system that really will transform the landscape, it seemed like a good name. What the system consists of are two Cerebrus CS1 servers. These are each one of these would be the largest AI system in the world. And we did two. And we did two because we want to understand scaling, as I mentioned. If we could scale to two, then we could scale to 3 or 4 or 100. 2 was the right number to begin. We're tying them together with a HPE Superdome Flex shared memory server as a front end. It's a very interesting front end. I'll go into detail about what it will be, but it's 896 cores, 24 terabytes of RAM. It's not what in other systems it would be a supercomputer. In here, it's a front end. And we'll federate with Bridges 2. The reason for doing that is to be able to draw on the very large data infrastructure Bridges 2 without having to replicate that here and to focus our resources on compute. Also, though, for general purpose compute, like pre-processing and post-processing, all the other parts of the machine learning workflow that were in one of the early slides. These are connected by 12 100 gigabit per second Ethernet links to each CS1. So 1.2 terabits to each CS1, 2.4 terabits total, and then 8 HDR200 links back to Bridges 2. So the design is for balance, to be able to move data from one system to the other, do training, and eliminate bottlenecks. Within the Superdome Flex, we have 205 terabytes of high performance NVMe solid state disk. That's also over 100 gigabytes per second bandwidth, 24 terabytes of RAM with 4.5 terabytes per second bandwidth. And then, as we said, it connects to Bridge's disk and luster file systems. So the CS1 itself, this is where a lot of the excitement is. The system looks like this box on the left. This is without lights on. It's much prettier with its lights on. It has a processor. The processor is called the wafer scale engine. It's called wafer scale because one manufactures processors on what's called a silicon wafer. And this square that you're looking at here, it'll be clear in the future slides, is basically the largest square one can describe on the largest wafer that's supported by current lithography plants at fabs like TSMC. So this is designed to be, normally one would produce something like this. It would be many, many processors. It would then be cut into those individual processors, and those would be individual CPUs or GPUs. In this case, the whole wafer is one processor. And then the Cerebras software platform with a compiler and intermediate representation, APIs, and kernels ties it all together. So this is what the processor looks like. And this is real size. These are a real person's hands. It's not a miniature person. And so this is one processor. It is enormous. It's 400,000 AI optimized cores, over 46,000 square millimeters of silicon, 1.2 trillion transistors. So all of the numbers here are 3 to 5 orders of magnitude bigger than state-of-the-art CPUs and GPUs. State-of-the-art CPUs and GPUs typically have on the order of 10 billion transistors. Here we're 1.2 trillion. So 2 orders of magnitude bigger, 18 gigabytes of on-chip memory, and this is SRAM. SRAM is the thing that we normally don't have because it's too expensive. But what gets you is it's very fast. Normally we see SRAM only in things like the L1 and L2 caches of processors. This 18 gigabytes of SRAM has memory bandwidth of 9 petabytes per second. Contrast that to the CPUs in Bridges 2, which are great CPUs. Their bandwidth is more on the order of 100 gigabytes per second. So this is a million times faster memory bandwidth. And that memory is only 1 clock away from the processors or the cores. 1 clock is phenomenal. L1 is typically 3 or 4 clocks. We also have within this wafer 100 petabits per second of fabric bandwidth. And the point of that is to eliminate bottlenecks to allow deep learning to proceed at full speed and to eliminate the bottlenecks we have now. So the overall system contains one of those wafer scale engines, 12 of these 100 gigabit Ethernet links. It's about 20 kilowatts of power. The programming interface is easy. It's TensorFlow, it's PyTorch, and that's key for usability. And there's a lot of very clever software that makes that possible to use those interfaces with this hardware. And we're built from the ground up to enable AI acceleration. Inside, it looks like this. These are engineering drawings, obviously. It's 15U high in a rack, so we're going to put 2 of these in one rack easily. One could put 3. And a lot of it, if you notice, is actually the cooling system. The processor is up here. There's an inner loop of cooling. There's a lot more here. It is a very robust system to cool this 20 kilowatt processor. This is the cutaway view. A lot of these slides are actually, these are actually from Cerebras used with permission. So this is what it looks like internally and expanded. Again, custom engineered, really well thought out. And the processor and its internal coolant's up here. That's a zoomed in view to that of what that looks like with the internal liquid cooling. This has been running for quite a while. these are two early systems in Los Gatos, California on the US West Coast. This with lights on. These are obviously programmable. And Argonne National Lab in Chicago deployed one of these last year around the time of the Supercomputing conference. And it's been generating some early experience with it. What's inside is, getting toward the end, is a 2D mesh of these compute cores. And the whole point is each core is a fully general purpose MIMD processor that can do all the general purpose things you want. It also has tensor optimizations to do those very rapidly. And it has specific instructions and data flow to harvest sparsity, because we know that most of the work in a deep network is actually multiplying zeros. And the key to this chip is to never multiply zeros. It pre-filters those. So whereas a GPU might do lots of flops, a lot of those flops are multiplying zeros. In here, we're not doing that. It is designed from the ground up for deep learning. The compute is the core, the data flow architecture. The orange lines here are the interconnect, the swarm network on the chip. The memory is distributed across the chip. And the whole idea is to let one train small batch sizes, even batch size 1, at very high utilization with no bottlenecks. I'm not going to go into much detail on the sparsity harvesting other than to really emphasize that is a key differentiator between this and other hardware that has been optimized for other applications to be dense arithmetic. We know for deep networks, we need sparsity. The memory is distributed across the chip, and that's the key. That's what gives us the 1 clock latency, the batch size 1 training at high utilization, and the extremely high bandwidth of 100 petabits. The fabric is supporting all of that. There's also being able to reconfigure the fabric is what also produces very high yield on these very large wafers. The Superdome Flex, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about, other than to say that it is 24 terabytes. It is a large shared memory system, so that all of the 32 Intel Xeon processors, their Intel Xeon 8280 Platinums, can access all 24 terabytes. And the point of this is to drive each CS1 individually for different workloads or both at the same time on the same workload. And that's never been done before. That's where we're looking to using this to scale problems up, while still make it very easy for users because their data does not have to be sharded across many nodes on a cluster. It will all be within this one massive full rack shared memory server. Its characteristics right here. Again, I won't go into them in detail, other than 32 Platinum CPUs, 24 terabytes of RAM, a lot of local NVMe disk, and a lot of networking both in and out. The architecture is here. This is the balance. So Bridges 2 is here for general purpose. Its file systems provide a lot of storage for large data sets and training. That goes to the Superdome Flex within Neocortex. That's this orange rectangle at 1.6 terabits. The Superdome Flex can then either train one or both of the CS1s. And that's the idea. Software stack is TensorFlow and PyTorch for usability. And as I said, the Cerebrus software platform is what makes this possible. Networks such as TensorFlow and PyTorch are ingested. Those descriptions of the problem are extracted into an intermediate representation called a layer. And that produces a kernel graph of all the kernels are needed to run that data flow. There are hand-tuned firmware kernels for these operations that map onto the Cerebrus wafer scale engine hardware. The user does not have to worry about that. The user only has to do TensorFlow and PyTorch. The software takes care of these steps. The software will be running on Bridges 2 to start, and then moving on to the real hardware. There's essentially a place and route step, like you would do for an FPGA or developing an ASIC. And that produces an execution plan that sits on this 2D mesh of the 400,000 cores on the wafer scale engine to give you spatial proximity, to let that 2D mesh do what it has to do. And then that is executed on the CS1. This runs in a singularity container that abstracts a lot of this detail from the user. So to summarize, the advantages are to really avoid the bottlenecks that otherwise occur, to really be able to scale model parallel training, not just data parallel. And that's the key. That's strong scaling to let us go 1,000 times faster potentially. To avoid all the bottlenecks, to be very usable and user-friendly by not having to optimize batch sizes, to train on small batch sizes, to not worry about different optimizers and learning rate schedules, and avoiding a lot of the work of optimizing a model. Harvesting sparsity and conditional computation lets things use the available cycles for productive work instead of multiplying zeros. That's key. And then scaling to multiple CS1s, that's the point of Neocortex and this research collaboration, is that one CS1 is going to work for a lot of research. But where it doesn't, scaling to fewer, fatter nodes is easier than scaling to thousands of GPUs. And the high bandwidth interconnect between the nodes makes that possible. We're starting an early user program. This is where life gets really exciting. We announced this on, I guess, on August 31st. And the early user program will begin in October. We will be getting hands-on access for people in November. We're accepting applications through September 21st. There's no cost. Again, there has to be a US collaborator just because of the way the system is structured. As funding, well, because of the way its funding is structured. But we would be happy to have collaborators. So the link to apply for this and to learn more about the details is here. Again, I'd be happy to share it directly with anyone that's interested. For updates and more information, first the Neocortex website that Paola and her group maintain. They are on Twitter at this handle, AIBD, AI and Big Data at PSC and CMU for Carnegie Mellon. And they're on LinkedIn at a similar handle. So please follow them, be in the loop for what is, as new information comes out. We have 2 webinars on YouTube now. They're linked from this website. One was an introduction. One was a technical overview where Natalia Vasilieva, who is one of the Cerebras lead engineers, covered a lot of the software stack last month. So I want just to wrap it up with COVID-19, because that's how we're putting some of this into application. There is an international COVID-19 consortium. We actually started doing COVID-19 work with the National Science Foundation prior to when that consortium was launched. So we have some projects from before, some within the consortium. This is a basic timeline. The National Science Foundation took the lead on this. They announced to stimulate research. Later, a few weeks later, the US White House announced this partnership. And we were one of the initial organizations in that. When I last looked at membership, this was almost 2 months ago. The membership was, it had 43 participating members. A lot were in the National Science Foundation, and what we do differently here is we actually provide user support, but there are DOE labs, NASA, other government agencies, commercial clouds, and so on. So there's a lot going on in this, and the point is to make massive computing available to help overcome this global pandemic. On Bridges 1, we have a number of projects. We have 4 that are in AI and machine learning, a couple in genomics, a couple in epidemiology, and 3 in molecular dynamics. I just want to highlight one of the genomic ones, because even though it's not AI, it's exceptional work, and it's drawing on genomic big data. It's from Chris Mason's group at the Weill Cornell Medicine at Cornell University, and they have been looking at comorbidity factors, identifying factors such as being on certain high blood pressure medications, negatively impacting one's outcomes for COVID-19, other comorbidities that one would not expect, like macular degeneration. also turns out to imply higher intubation and death rates. They have developed a fast 30-second and inexpensive test that is much more scalable than PCR. It's called LAMP for loop amplified. It's a loop amplified phosphorescence test, and that's now being deployed in certain cities. So they've done a lot of great work in this using large memory on bridges. We have people in Europe who have been working with the JEDI Grand Challenge on the billion molecules against COVID-19 using large machine learning workflows to down select these billion molecules down to a ranked list of candidates for drug therapies. And that's an ongoing competition. They have published their approach here on the JEDI Challenge GitHub site. And the last one, I had started this whole talk with work on quantum chemistry and what is being made possible to accelerate CCSDT level calculations by a factor of 1 billion. So a colleague at Carnegie Mellon that happens, he moved here in January, Oles Isiev, is applying that now. He's one of the authors on those papers on the first slide I showed you. And he's been applying that with his colleagues to also do drug prediction for likely COVID-19 therapies. And they have released this database of 50,000 molecules for potential drug candidates. That's on this MolC molecular sciences data repository. It's out there for people to use. They're working on doing next generations. The key to this was Bridges AI. They were able to do what they wanted to do very rapidly in a couple weeks and generate a community resource that others can now use to take to the clinic or other means to understand, to develop drugs that will actually help people who are afflicted with COVID-19. So I'll close it with that and a very quick summary slide, but then take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. It was a great talk. I was impressive of all the projects you are involved in all these years. It's very, very nice. I have a couple of questions from the audience. I will start by one that is I was thinking of also. So, and it's about the Latin American community, which is, as anyone in the world, very interested in this amazing topic of AI. And after your presentation, I was thinking, what will be your advice for Latin American researchers that are involved in AI research? If do they need all these infrastructure, all these big, huge supercomputer that you presented us, and if we don't have access directly to them because we don't have that in Latin America, your advice will be go partner with someone in US, because as you mentioned, partnering with US researchers will give us access to propose projects to run on those machines, or are clouds already are clouds ready to receive these the needs of the AI researchers? Because I saw you mention that you are implementing both containers and virtual machines on these facilities. So maybe we can just access to these kind of large facilities through the cloud and public cloud, or should we try to set up our own facilities here in Latam so we can really compete on this arena? Otherwise, it will be very, very difficult for local researchers to really have impact of their work on AI. What do you think?
So my honest opinion is your greatest asset is the number of really brilliant people you have. And that's what you have that is I'm trying to think of the right word. It is, that's what you have that is fundamental. The challenge with AI hardware is that it changes so fast. So for Bridges 2, we are installing V100s because that is what is available this fall when we have to install. Very quickly, Ampere will be available. And there's this, one's constantly playing catch up. And that catch up is very expensive. So I would say the first thing is look to your great human resources. And the key is to find ways for them to, as you say, compete, but more importantly, to learn, to make progress, and to achieve. To me, competition is okay, but I like to think that we're doing what we're doing to help people on the planet. The competition is secondary, or it should be. So then there are different ways to build on this. One is that we are happy to partner. We also have discretionary access we can give to these resources. I don't want to speak for Paola, who may be online right now. I'm not sure because I think I just see the panel view. But what I would say is, like for Bridges 2, that I definitely can speak for, of that discretionary pool, and I think for Neocortex as well, one of the things we feel strongly about is the whole idea of AI for good. So how can we apply these unique resources that we're fortunate enough to have access to just because of where we happen to be? That's just luck. And how can we make those available to the community to do societal good things, to help people, to discover the causes of rare diseases and help them, to help quality of life? That to me is the key. And so I want to go back and regroup real quickly on my thoughts and make sure I don't have any important other channels coming in. So one is, yeah, we're happy to partner. Second one is for initiatives like AI for Good. That's where I would be happy to make access available totally free again on Bridges 2 through my discretionary allocation as the principal investigator for Latinx teams to contribute to that, because it helps all of us. It's the right thing to do. And I suspect would be willing to do that for Neocortex too. So that can apply. So those are absolutely there for the things we can speak to and we can control. Now with commercial clouds, it's certainly possible to get cloud credits to do some work. And that can be very valuable. There can be collaborations to be had. I think a lot of that's about the relationships, establishing what it is that your groups are working on that would be of mutual interest. I will, just to be candid, I will say that we've certainly had users in the US who have had cloud credits, such as for classes or research projects, and they have just run out very fast. So then they have come back to us and say, hey, we had cloud, we ran out. Can we use you now? And of course they can. So the cloud is good if you can get access. The key is getting the access. For COVID-19, large cloud vendors, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, all chipped in a lot of free resources. And so there's a lot you can do there in the cloud at no cost with COVID-19. And as did NVIDIA and HPE, they've done things too. So for special themes, there's more available than would be otherwise. The other thing is, I'm thinking there's the HPC Americas collaboration. And I think there are Department of Energy resources that could be leveraged through that. I don't want to speak for them, but I believe that's what HPC Americas is. I believe it involves a part of that. And then there's getting your own. So with getting your own, I would say get the relationships with your vendors. Look for places where you can really help each other. areas that are, again, for societal good, where I know there are some vendors. One thing I really like working with HPE is that the CEO, Antonio, really does believe in global sustainability and in quality of life for HPE employees and others. And so working with vendors on ways to be creative about getting solutions in the field, I think can be, it has potential to be fruitful. There's a lot to be done in workforce development. I think that everyone is challenged by having not enough skilled people in the pipeline for these fields. I know that, again, vendors I talk to are looking for quality interns that they then hope will be quality contributors to their organizations. The workforce development angle may be able to help you as well, because that may be a way to get access to resources for projects you are doing, where the idea would be that it would be a win-win, because the vendors would be looking for people with wonderful training. Students would have a great career path in these fields, and there could be access to resources through this. So that's something else that could be worth exploring. I should note along those lines at PSC, we are certainly hiring. We have institutional restrictions right now on hiring internationally just because of the pandemic. I don't know when those will lift. I hope it will be soon. But I also know there are people on this call, they're probably already in the US, for which that would not be an issue at all. And for those that are remote, there may be some time before we are able to do this because of the pandemic, but that doesn't mean we won't want to start discussions and to make plans.
Okay. Thank you, Nicolas. We have 2 minutes more for maybe not the full answer, but just give us a hint or URL to look for.
Mm-hmm.
There are some questions about the I/O architecture of Bridge 2,
Mm-hmm.
mainly on the issue how it can keep the I/O performance for AI applications. So there's people who want to know a little bit more about this I/O subsystem.
Yes, I would say whoever is asking this, please send me a note. I'd be happy to even set up a call. We could just talk about it. But the very quick answer is that, and this is the right slide. Each of the GPU nodes in Bridges 2 has about 8 terabytes of high performance NVMe SSD. That's adequate for caching a lot of local data sets for training. That's the tier 1. For things that don't fit in that, or they need to federate and go back and forth, that's where the connection goes across here to the flash array. That flash array is designed to deliver 100 gigabits per second. And the 9 million IOPS is a particular design for doing things like CNNs that are more random access. The advantage of LSTMs and transformers is smaller. They tend to be more sequential. But that's the short answer. I'd be happy to follow up after.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we have to move on. And we have the presentation from HPE next to your talk. Mm-hmm. And I think they are going to go deeper on this kind of facilities. So Nicolas, thank you very much. And Paola, who I know she's also there. And thank you both because of your great presentation, and we appreciate a lot your commitment with CARLA and to be here for us and to accompany and to be close to all of our initiatives and to support them. Thank you very much, Nicolas, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Harold.
Thank you very much, Harold.
Thank you,
now,
Harold.
let me introduce to Professor Philippe Navaux from Universidad Federal del Rio Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre, Brazil. He is the chair and moderator of the next section. Welcome,
Thank
Professor
you,
Philippe.
Carlos. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Engineer Lim Goh. He is Senior Vice President, Chief Technology Officer, Artificial Intelligence from Hewlett-Packard. Dr. Lim is Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for Artificial Intelligence at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Prior to this, he was CTO for majority of his 27 years at Silicon Graphics, now an HP company. His research interests include humanities differentiation as we progress from analytics to inductive machine learning, deductive reasoning, and artificial specific to general intelligence. He continues his studies in human perception for virtual and augmented reality. So please, Dr. Lin, it's your time. Thank you to be with us in CARLA. Please.
Thank you, Professor. Yes, and thank you, Nick, for your great presentation. I learned a lot, even though we've worked together for many years. Yes, we've worked together with Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center on their Bridges system, as well as the Superdome system and systems before that. Today, I would like to spend my time talking about that, to lead on, with Nick's lead on. I would like to continue that talk about data, high performance computing and AI, and in fact, what we learned from COVID-19 in working with our customers, particularly at the beginning in the healthcare industry and biomedical industry, and then later for the economies of the various customers and countries. I'll start. Let's start with COVID-19 itself. This is a popular visual of it by the CDC. One of the first things people do is to figure out the DNA sequences of the virus, of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The next thing they'll be interested in is the 3D structure of the virus. In particular, the 3D structure of the spike protein, right? I bring it close here, of the spike protein, right? That actually attaches to our ACE2 receptors in our nose and our lungs. To do that, what they do is to put the virus on a surface and then use an electron microscope. Light microscope wouldn't be high resolution enough. And then they take, with very high resolution cameras, lots of short movies of the virus. Yeah, and in order to get the 3D structure, they actually tilt the surface where the virus is on, and then take lots of these movies all day, right? Thousands of these short movies are taken using not just a 4K camera, but a 4K by 4K camera at high speeds. Now, after one day, right, they have about 4 terabytes of data. And one of the big lessons we learned here is how to get that enormous amounts of data off that one device, right, let alone many other devices, and bring it into the system for computation. So data movement at high speeds was something that we really need to build reference architectures for many of these instruments. Yeah, the cryo-electron microscope is just one example. Imagine if they switch, which they are coming to, an 8K by 8K camera at much higher frame rates. You can think about a data rate of about 40 terabytes a day per instrument. So we've been spending a lot of time building reference architecture recently to deal with the fact that massive amounts of these data are coming out of very high resolution sensors from everywhere, in particular in biomedical recently. So you create all these movies, and then they run through supercomputing computations to compose all these movies at different angles that the virus is exposed to, and try and create a 3D structure. And one of the key is to figure out that 3D structure of the spike protein. Yeah, the spike here, these spikes there, right, of the spike protein. One of the reasons we do that is so that we can also figure out how strong is the binding between that spike protein down here and the ACE2 receptor, which is either the ACE2 receptor in our bodies, a lot in the nose and all the way to our lungs, right? And that's how the virus attaches and infects the human. And one of the key things is to use supercomputing after you created, understood the DNA sequences, the 3D structure, to try and figure out how the two bind, right? And to try and figure out the binding energy between those two. And the reason we do that is so that we can then, as Nick have mentioned, screen through all the available drugs to see if you get a similar binding energy to block the ACE2 receptor so that it doesn't bind with, to block the spike protein so that it doesn't attach to our ACE2 receptor. So that drug is the thing they're looking for, the thing that can block the spike here. And calculating at high fidelity this binding energy is very important. One of the lessons we learned here is that it is the tough balance between running through a lot of drugs calculation, but calculating at lower fidelity with less physics, to being able to run through less drugs, try out less drugs, and calculate, doing the calculation at higher fidelity. So this is the tough balance we learn, and the one we went with, and many are doing both, right? And the one we went with and spent a lot more time on with one customer using one of our supercomputers is the high fidelity approach. You know, I learned a lot in this process. You know, these dockings are based on either molecular mechanics or even better molecular dynamics, but they are all just approximation to the ultimate, which is quantum mechanics, right? But quantum mechanics is just too heavy to do. So what we do is we add more physics, yeah, by what they call adding polarizable force fields, and instead of implicit water, explicit water, more and more physics, yeah, is added to try and get a good high fidelity binding between the selected drugs and the spike protein. So that in the hopes that when we actually go to a wet lab and test, you know, yeah, the chances of success is higher. So lots of data throughput on the left of this picture, and lots of computation at high fidelity with increasing physics on the right of this picture. Yeah. The other thing we did is the fact that the community got together, yeah, with the White House initiative, community got together to assemble hundreds of thousands of scientific publications about COVID-19. I think today it stands at about 130,000, the last I checked. So the issue with this is that a researcher working on COVID-19 won't have time, even if he or she has a team of researchers, to try and go through all the document, even if you just read titles, right? Right? That's because the rate of publication is massive, yeah, let alone the ones that was published before when you started, right? So there was a initiative by different groups to come up with a NLP, natural language processing system, that is domain customizable. In this case, we customize it to COVID-19 and biomedical field type Q&A, so that a scientist or new researcher coming in could ask questions of it, right? Let me just do a quick demo. This is a live website. I just click on it, right? And here you can see I can ask a question, right? In this case, we use the same question, ask the question that we talked about, binding energy. What is the binding energy, right, of the SARS-CoV-2, right, to our ACE2 receptor, right? I just be a bit more specific in here. I want it in the correct units, kcal per mole. Right? I hit return. It goes in, many GPUs are applied through to the natural language processor to produce the most relevant scientific papers. But it first answers the question first. It's 15.7, minus 15.7. It usually has a minus sign in there. Minus 15.7 kcal per mole, right? And it actually tells you where in this scientific document, right, the answer was found, right? And you can also, of course, click onto the scientific document, and it brings you to the document itself. In this case, it is the NIH library, with this paper with the answer in there. So interesting applications are being developed to help with different aspects of the COVID-19 needs, right? And we want to be highly responsive to our customers. And in the earlier months, a lot of the queries from our customers were in these areas. First, it was modeling the virus. Next, it was calculating binding energy. And third, this one next is where how to deal with the massive amounts of publications and pre-publications that are coming out so that you can ask questions of all that is related to all the documents, right? That goes through all these documents. Yeah. So this is live on our website today, and do check with our team or your contact at HPE for the URL to this. Yeah. Next, more recently, a lot of our customers are, well, we have customers in the biomedical field, but more recently, we have also increasing customers in the economic field, in particular of their employees returning to work, of the factory workers returning to work, of people working in processing plants, being reassured, right, that while they are working as essential services, that regulations for social distancing, contact tracing, location tracing are met. So we had lots of interest in that area from our economic customers. Yeah, people running businesses, running factories and processing plants. So I brought up this picture of our San Jose headquarters in California, in Silicon Valley. And you can see, that's where we sit, that's where Antonio sits, right, further on the upper floors. And then you can see things are quiet at the moment because businesses like us are working on returning to work. That's one area. Right? How to reassure employees when they return to work, right? And when they return to factories or processing plants, or staff up the processing plants even further. In addition to that, working with one of the key solutions we've come up with our Aruba team is what we call the Aruba contact and location tracing solution. Essentially, in one example, every employee is given the tag, right? A Bluetooth low energy tag that's attached to your badge, right? And this solves one of the privacy first. Additionally, this solves one of the big issues of factories and offices. For example, if one employee reports that he or she is ill, right? There are certain jurisdictions that requires disinfection of the area. Now, if you do not know the localized area dwelled or used by this employee, you are perhaps required to disinfect the entire factory, or disinfect the entire processing plant, or disinfect the entire floor, right? Or even the whole building in the office, right? So with this Bluetooth low energy system and our Wi-Fi system from Aruba, that's already in place in many tens of billions of square feet is being covered by our Aruba Wi-Fi. It can come up with a heat map for you to tell you, the dwell time. They call it how long, because certain jurisdiction has a certain regulation as to how long that person has spent in that area before you are required to disinfect to a certain level. And here you can see the heat map, and the strong benefit of this, of course, is you don't therefore have to special clean the entire floor. You only need to special clean in a very localized area indicated to you by the heat map. So this is called location tracing. And similarly with contact tracing, it's not so much the dwell time on a particular area. Oh, by the way, you will notice that on top, there are of course certain privacy points where, like for example, in the washroom, it is totally not tracked at all. Yeah. That's location tracing. Then how about contact tracing? How many other employees did this employee engage with, right? They call it how many contact minutes with all these employees. And the system can actually come up with you. It's anonymized. So person 63 is a person that's ill, right? And you key in that, within 2 meters, right? There is, what are the contacts in the entire day? it'll give you a list, right? In this case, it shows up as person 13 and there are other persons. But I've just shown an example of person 13 came in contact with person 63 that is ill. And all these, the shaded areas are all the contact minutes, yeah? This is a 9-minute contact. And a whole list is then being produced. And all people can see are all the HR can see, right? HR accesses this, and all the HR can see are the person's number. And then only approved people, right? Approved person or persons are allowed to see the cross-reference between the person number and the name of the person for follow-up to be taken. Yeah. So contact location tracing, we're also working with a partner to do real-time social distancing, so which is the third factor. So you have contact tracing, you have location tracing, and then you have real-time social distancing, where what the badge would vibrate, for example, if you have too long a contact and too close a contact with another person. So that's a real-time one. So all these are important privacy-first solutions that are sought after, not just by, interestingly, by companies, but also employees. There are certain employees in certain environments that want to be reassured that there are solutions in place that would meet the jurisdiction's regulation. So a very active area currently. So you will see that at the beginning of our, in the first early phases of COVID-19, we're working a lot with in the healthcare industry and biomedical industry, right? Treatments and vaccines, clinical trials. And then more recently, while these still continue, more recently we are working more, we continue while we are working with the biomedical and healthcare industry. More recently, we've seen an upsurge in businesses coming to us for these solutions. Essential services also needs to continue, right? These are more machinery, right? So this is an electrical grid solution, right? It's essential services for power. Essential services for water. You can see this is a desalination plant. And all these need to carry on, right? The other and by the way, when we went into contact and location tracing, a lot of compute power is needed to give real-time solutions, right? So in the earlier cases of contact location tracing, I forgot to mention, let me go back there quickly, right? The key here is not so much high bandwidth data. The key here isn't so much high performance computing, but key here is computing with very low latency, right? Especially if you're doing real-time contact tracing. So you need high performance computers that can respond quickly. Now, in addition to offices, factories, and processing plants for the people, for the staff, there are companies that came to us to see how they can even more remotely monitor and manage the electrical components, their machineries remotely. That's the electrical power grid. That's is a water desalination plant. So we've worked with ABB, which is a Swiss engineering company, one of the world leaders, to come up with, and they already have their Ability Smart Sensor that is attached to any rotating machinery, right? Pumps, generators, motors, HVAC, anything that fans and anything that rotates, you stick one of these wireless Ability Smart Sensor to it, and it collects all this temperature, vibration, magnetic field, all this data into that device. And we have integrated it so that it can be brought to the ABB cloud for analytics, fault prediction, and action to be taken. And we came in between, right? To allow these Aruba smart sensors, Aruba APs, access point, to collect all this data very quickly, right? Wi-Fi 6 is the latest at 5 gigabits. And then also ruggedized it if they really need to be outdoors, right? Up to 65 degrees centigrade. And for those who know, splash proof up to, in fact, water immersion up to IP67 and pretty high winds, yeah. So these are highly rated, ruggedized versions of the access point, routed through the network controller and into the cloud. So again, you will see us now supplying edge to cloud, right? We have edge devices out there that are close to the IoT on the left. And then we supply high performance computing, low latency computing, high bandwidth computing, and supercomputing on the right in the cloud if necessary. Yeah. And when I say cloud, it could be public cloud, on-prem cloud, private cloud. Yeah. And this is the picture, right? This actually summarizes very much what I've been talking about. On the left, you really have instruments, right? Devices that collects data. And these are your IoTs and also your cameras, your microphones and text. So typically these are the three kinds of data we receive. It's either in images or video or in audio, becoming important now, or things are converted into text by, and being sent through to the wireless devices that Aruba puts up in a secured way, and then move back to the cloud at the far end. However, there is an issue here. As your IoT devices and your sensors grow in quantities, right? Not just each of them high bandwidth, but the quantity grows to tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000, 100,000. In the case of street lamps, right? We're talking 200, 300,000, right? In a city. And then you get examples of cameras, right? Millions, 500,000 cameras. It starts to get too chatty, right? To be able to have each of them have too much of a direct access to the cloud, right? And this is the reason, and this is the reason why we've started to put all these edge servers that are ruggedized to sit very close to the sensors, right? To first consolidate all the data in there. Now, these are also high performance computers, just a single server of them, right? But ruggedized to take a high temperature. And in this case, the one on top called the EL300 does not have a fan at all. It uses lots of these cooling fins, right? So it's passive cooling fins, and it can still take up to 70 degrees centigrade, yeah, and still operate. It carries an single Intel processor in it that is multi-core with memory and so on. The key thing is that all the antennas out there, yes, currently the 4G antenna and Wi-Fi antennas, all plugged in, ready to do a wireless communication between first bridging it from the IoT side and then back end all to the IT equipment side. Yeah. One thing I brought up just now that I didn't talk about is that yes, you have images and video, you have audio, you have text, but more and more now, as you've seen with the machinery, we are collecting not just digital data that is either images, audio, or text, but OT data, operational technology data. The top three are more IT data, and that bottom one is operational technology data, where what the machinery world works in, the factories work in, right? Engineering works in, right? And that is becoming more and more the fourth kind of data that's being received. There are a lot of times some of these OT devices do translate into text before being sent, but some of them actually bring in the OT signals raw. And something like these are OT ready. So they also act between an OT device and translate it into and communicate it with the IT device. So they act also as an OT to IT bridge. You hear that more and more as these supercomputers now have to get data from, because of machine learning, for example, get data from more and more variety of edge devices, yeah, and to be able to learn from them and therefore be smarter. Here are some of the other examples of the edge device, right? So we now look at some of these edge operations out here. Even with COVID-19, the Formula One race continues. Last year, we worked on the design right from the beginning last year for this year's season with the Mercedes team for their Formula One cars, the two cars, Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. And so far, they have done 7 races, 7 Grand Prix, and they won. Mercedes has won 6 of the 7. Yeah, because we play a part in using machine learning in the design of the car. The idea is to shorten the design time, the need for design by using AI to go through a lot more things right? And I can't say much about it. Goes through a lot more things and shorten the design cycle, and therefore use the entire time to do more design iteration, right? But the key thing here is during a race, every car has 300 sensors in it. So again, you know, we are talking about sensors at the edge that the supercomputer back at headquarters have to deal with, the cloud, right? 300 sensors, right? And then every race, 18,000 channels of data is collected, right? That's a lot of data. Some are OT data, some are IT data, right? And then there are about 7 billion data points over a Friday, Saturday, Sunday weekend that are being touched. All these data points are being monitored, right? And it works out to about 3.5 terabytes of data. So the two cars together with their 300 sensors as they race on the track accumulate about 0.5 terabyte of data. And then the remaining 3 terabytes comes from videos that are on track site, but not on the car, on track sites and so on. Yeah, all this come together, 3.5 terabyte is being sent back to headquarters in the UK. So regardless of where they race, you know, all the different countries, South America, US, Europe, Asia, all the places they race, the 3.5 terabytes each weekend is being sent back to the UK headquarters. And the headquarters then generates 45 terabytes of data out of it, right? And they have high performance computers at the back end, yeah, doing a lot of this work, crunching of the data, and then advising the cars. Yeah. And then I'd just like to add one more point, you know, back to the original 300 sensors. Turns out that you do not forget the 301st sensor, the +1 sensor, that is who? The driver. Yeah, and one of the lessons learned from the last season was trust that one sensor, trust the driver. These are high performance athletes. So this is an example of Valtteri Bottas calling back by radio during his race to say that, you know, I keep sensing an engine cutoff whenever I pass through here. I keep sensing it, right? Every time he passes through that particular point. We check all the data collected. The 300 sensors did not see it, right? So the team asked him to press a signal button every time he sensed it. And then we isolated it down to a bridge, a very old bridge that is not only cast iron, metal bridge, right, but also have metal arches. And apparently it formed a Faraday cage, and then every time it passes through, there was a 1,000th second cutoff that our sensors didn't have the sensing frequency to sense it, but he felt it, right? He felt it in his bum, right? Because he was sitting down and he felt it, right? And we trusted him. And the next time around, he came in for a pit stop. We wrapped aluminum foil around the two sensors that are causing that cutoff, right? And he carried on the race. Yeah. So again, don't forget, with all the OT, IT, automation, you know, if the person is in the loop, you know, listen to that person. Yeah, that was one of the lessons we learned. Yeah. There is artificial intelligence. There is also natural intelligence. Yeah, both have value. I was asked that question once. So, what's fundamentally the differences in value? How do you say it in one phrase, right? The way I say it is all these sensors, IT and OT and so on, you know, AI, essentially collects data that are filterers. Data is collected that are accumulators, right? Not filters, accumulators. So all this data is accumulated, right? We accumulate from the 300 sensors, all the data points from the camera, from all the different places. We accumulate, and then we train our machine with it, right? Of course, we select and then we train our machine with it. But essentially, you know, these data systems are, the data OT IT systems are data collectors, data accumulators. Interestingly, humans are the opposite. Humans are natural filterers, right? Because when we're in a noisy room, we can still carry on a conversation with one other person and can still block off, and the noise in the background, the conversation in the background eventually does not bother us, because we are natural filterers, because our brain will be inundated with signals if we are not we are not trained filterers. Yeah? So between the two, they come from a different place. One is an accumulator, the other one's a filterer, right? And together, you know, hopefully we can make better decisions if we trust both. the AI and the NI, I call it, natural intelligence. Related to Formula One is, of course, autonomous cars. That's being talked about a lot right now. These cars also are at the edge, right? Currently, we don't have enough wireless bandwidth to move that terabytes of data back up to the headquarters as the car is collecting the data. You know, they loaded up multi-terabytes of solid-state drives as they go out on their drive. And then the cars come back up into the parking lot of the data center, and the two drives are being pulled out, and then the person using sneakerwear walks up to the data center. It's still operating like this right now. The bandwidth is requirement is just too high, and apparently you download and upload much faster that way. So again, I just want to emphasize on this point here. There's edge to cloud again. You try to get data from the edge to the cloud, but then there are many ways of doing it here. Talking about the edge, this is the farthest edge. There is no, this is our farthest edge device. Yeah, the furthest edge device there is. The dotted line shows you where the SpaceX capsule docked, SpaceX 16 docked. And then the solid line shows you where the astronaut will be bringing the HPE server straight off the shelf, after docking, and then plugging it into the space station. The goal of this experiment was to prove that we can use straight off the shelf, unmodified HPE servers, right? Of course, they have to be certified by NASA first. Straight off the shelf, you can buy this off the price book, but loaded with autonomous software so that the server can take care of itself. Yeah, just like autonomous cars, we are looking at autonomous servers that is self-running, right? So that you can accompany an astronaut at a high-performance computer, right? Accompany an astronaut as they fly. The goal is to ultimately go to Mars, right? And this is, more than a year's a journey there and back, right? Of course, the ruggedized servers that are certified radiation hardness and so on are key. They will run the mission-critical applications, but these high-performance servers that are the very latest on the day of launch will be the ones that do the running Linux, will be the ones that runs the general purpose applications, and you can preload all the applications you need there so that you have your low latency access to applications you need at high performance as you're further and further away from Earth. Right? Mars can be up to 20 minutes, right? To ask a question, when you're near Mars, you ask a question of Earth for support. It takes 20 minutes for the questions to arrive, and then Earth then formulates an answer and then sends the answer back. It takes 20 minutes to go back. So it could be up to 40 minutes, right, round trip to get an answer. And for certain applications, it's too long, and therefore it is realized that you need to be able to carry some high performance capability with you out there. At some point, this server we ran HP, of course, Limpack and HPCG, and it was actually on the HPCG top. At that time, it's not maybe top 100, top 200 list. And in order to submit this, to the committee, you had to specify where the system is, typically where this supercomputer is. Right? We had a hard time saying which country, number one, and we had a hard time saying what address. Yeah, so I think we ended up saying the country was space, and the state was International Space Station. I can't remember, but just as an interesting note, right? There was an issue trying to answer the questions, to fill a form to submit something that people have not thought of, right? Oh, by the way, the system got back. It ran for 1.5 years without glitching itself. Of course, there were other glitches outside of the system that caused it to moderate itself because of the autonomous software, but it did not have a glitch at all due to itself, running autonomously for a year plus, and returned to Earth, and many lessons were learned. Report was written, many lessons were learned, and we were awarded the NASA Exceptional Technology Achievement Medal for this work. Yeah, it was quite an achievement for the team. Yeah. Extreme edge, right? Right. So I've spoken about the left side of this picture a lot more today, but I thought it is important because data is a new currency, right? Yeah. So follow the money. So follow the data. So in order for the supercomputers, as Nick mentioned, to be able to of various kinds, right? Maybe on-prem or cloud, for it to be able to train on the data and be smarter, it needs the data, right? So it is important to know where the data, much of the data is coming from, all the way from space, right? Where there is a lot more latency, where you need a lot more compute power at the edge on the left to Earth, but there are also times you need consolidators on the left also, so that you can be more efficiently bring the data back to the cloud for the training part of things, right? And after the training of your machine, then you send back the trained models, right, to the edge for inferencing and decision making. And these same edge servers on the left here can be inference engines themselves. Yeah. And I close this session, as I said, if data is the new currency, follow the money, and therefore follow the data, right? This one is important because the next question a lot of our customers ask, right? You have the biomedical field, you have the economies, low latency response, you have the factories collecting the data, you have sports collecting data, all the way to space collecting data, right? How do you get all this data and back to the cloud and then start training, training your machine with it? Do you have an infrastructure to help us with it so that it's easy to do so? So the answer is yes. We've recently announced HPE Esmeralda to do this work. Essentially, as the data comes in, right, follow the data. The first thing it does, it meets the Esmeralda data fabric. And in some IT industry, they call it the data ops, right? Essentially, first thing it does, it virtualizes the data to allow you to put the data anywhere, but it creates a global namespace to track the data. Maybe some parts of it still is at the edge, some parts of it is on-prem, on your data center prem, right? Some parts of it is on the public cloud, right? It provides, the Esmeralda data fabric provides one global namespace to track where all these pieces of data are and their movement, right? That's very important. So so that you have to instead of virtualizing applications, right? This is virtualizing the data. So you don't have to worry too much about it and let Esmeralda data fabric track it. And not only that, right? It also allows policy to move data automatically, right? Data fabric based on whether this data is supposed to be on hot storage, warm storage, or cold storage, right? So not only can it span geographically, it could also span temperature, hot, warm, or cold. And then all this can be managed by policy. And of course, scale, right? This thing goes to an exabyte class data scale, right? There is a resiliency for snapshot. So you also want it to be resilient so that if there is any failures anywhere, given the wide span of this, the geographical and also temperature span, right? You are worried that there are glitches in the data. Can you do snapshot? The answer is yes, but snapshots typically are heavy load, right? You do a snapshot in a naive way. You can't afford to snapshot, in a naive way an exabyte data set. So you only snapshot the 8 kilobyte differences level. So these are some of the smart things it does. And of course there is security, right? And then you want to start training your model, right? And you have your frameworks that you put into Esmeralda, MLOps, and so on. And then the data flows, the data you want to train is picked from, regardless of geography, because you're just looking at a global namespace. You pick, based on the global namespace, the type of files or the data you want to feed into MLOps for training. You will then pull the data from the right places. So you build your models, given your frameworks, you train your models, you're ready for inference, and then you also monitor once you deploy. And then in order to deploy, you have the Esmeralda container platform, which is DevOps, and it starts to containerize things to make it deployable. Today, Kubernetes, as Nick mentioned, there's also Singularity containers. They're not supported in this framework today, but there's strong discussion currently because the HPC industry, this came from the IT industry, right? IT, machine learning, banking, finance, healthcare industry, more finance, well, more the commercial side of our business, to create this easy to use applications stack, right, SML stack. There's the HPC industry starting to show strong interest in this. So we have to figure out a way to get the container platform to support Singularity containers, get it to support Lastre, and based on Singularity containers, you get easier support for GPUs, Lastres, and things like Slurm and so on. And then finally, once you make it deployable as a container, you send it out to be deployed as a service if you want to, right? So GreenLake and PointNix is there to help you deploy edge to cloud as a service, because sometimes you want to deploy the inference engine, and well, many times you want to deploy the inference engine at the edge, but there are also times you want to deploy inference engine at the cloud or somewhere in between or on-prem. So all these are the deployment tools out there. And finally, you've got the IT ops below supporting everything above that. So the key here is to follow the data, because a lot of our customers know where the data is coming from, but then they ask, what's next if I want to train a machine, right? And this is the flow we're building. And we don't have to employ all of the parts of the stack, but we are making it comprehensive as we are completing many of the features that are being requested to allow you the full stack, but you can also pick from it. Ease of use of deploying machine learning algorithms. Not only deploying, right? I'd like to mention that the word monitor here is very important, right? Because we've done about 100 AI use cases, and many of them have gone operational. But one thing we observe is once you deploy your AI inference engine at the edge, for example, is making decisions for you at very high accuracy. So say 96% accurate, right? In the decision-making mix, right? Maybe facial recognition, or maybe sensing, right? That a machine is about to fail because the vibration has changed quite a bit from before it was trained with, right? And therefore to send someone out to fix it before it fails, right? Essential services, right? So to want to fix before failure, preemptively. These accuracy, let's say at 96%, starts to drift downwards, starts to degrade, yeah, over time. I myself not quite sure definitively what's going on, but a lot of these deployed AI inference engines tend to degrade in performance over time, and therefore there's all retraining required based on new data, right? Maybe the temperature has changed, or the environment temperature has changed. Maybe overall that platform where the machinery is on is vibrating even a bit more due to other reasons, right? There are many new variables, things that change, that come in, that the machine learning models need to be retrained on. And that's why MLOps is important, because it's not just train. I should put in there retraining also. So it does all that monitoring for you, what data set was used to train the original ones, and then what additional new data came in to train the next version, and tracks all that for you. It's like version control, but for machine learning training, yeah, for machine learning. So I close this session. On this slide again, right? That's the key. That's the key slide. That's the key slide, and from the edge to the cloud. And the key here is to keep in mind that you have a supercomputer, right? And a lot of customers say the next thing is, how do I get the data quickly to the supercomputer in an organized way, right? Many AI projects I've seen, it is 80-20. 80% of the time is spent data. Well, it's even more if you have to collect. 80% of the time is spent data preparation, right? And data QA, right? Before you feed the machine that was going to train very quickly, the 20% of the time, right? So that 80% is what we're looking at making more efficient. Let alone the fact that if you are starting from scratch and collecting the data now, right? like the autonomous cars people. They're accumulating billions of miles, or hundreds of million miles, right? And then they're running computer simulation to simulate the remainder, because sometimes you just can't collect so much. And for those who are interested in comprehensive, well, not comprehensive, but a list of all the research we've done for work we've done with the customers on COVID-19, there is an 8-minute video, and you just Google HPE Accelerate Research Back to Business, and that video would pop up, and you click on it, and it is a description of the various things we've done with our customers on COVID-19, some of which has been mentioned in this talk, but the 8-minute video will give you a more comprehensive view. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Goh. Let's look for some questions. I'm not sure if there are questions in the chat. Mr. Goh, I had a question. I have a question about you are speaking exactly in this slide. You are speaking about the edge with the cloud, and one of the point is we are discussing more about processing in the IoT, processing in the cloud. But what you can speak about the connection between cloud and IoT? I think this is a problem if you had a lot of data to exchange between the IoT and the cloud. What are the suggestions?
So there are two things we did. So this is the key problem, right? The IoT side, the sensor side. Some sensors are not. Some sensor manufacturers don't classify their systems, the sensors as IoT, but let's call them IoT and sensors, right? Essentially, devices at the extreme edge that there are the points where all the data is first collected. The first thing you need to do is consolidation, right? And be smart about what you send back to the cloud. So therefore, that part, one thing I didn't mention, you have a great question there, and opportunity to answer to include that, is the fact that one other thing these edge servers do is filter the data. Be smart about what you send back, right? Because these are accumulators at this end, right? You're accumulating everything. And a lot of times, for example, if there are no changes, you don't need to keep using up bandwidth to send back those no change data, for example, right? So these servers not only act as the OT to IT bridge, these servers not only act as data consolidators, so that when you send data back, you send them in bulk, rather than in very chatty way that is less efficient for bulk data transfers, communication network, right? And the third thing they do is they are smart about what they need to send back. Yeah. So only new data is sent back that is needed for training. So that's one thing, be smart about what you send back, yeah, given the fact that the data collected will overwhelm the bandwidth we have here in many cases. The second thing we've done is come up with a technique called swarm learning to allow these edge devices to do machine learning without having to send the data back. Now, the idea didn't start because we were more concerned about the bandwidth to send the data back to the cloud. The idea started because we had certain customers that have an issue with security. They are concerned about security of sending data over the wide area network, right? So they say, you already have an edge device in there. Can I do machine learning there? Of course, you do the first learning, the bulk learning at the beginning on the cloud side. But the question is, for the incremental learning when new data are coming after you deploy, to maintain the accuracy, say at 96%, can you continue learning only at the edge, right? And this is where, but then each of these servers are not powerful enough, right? But Swarm can. If many of these servers come together, 100 of them, 50 of them, right? 25 of them, in some cases, few hundreds of them, are come together and learn as a swarm, right? Do they have enough power? So we've developed a technique called swarm learning. You can look that up, HPE swarm learning. And essentially, in terms of coordination, so that there is no central control, it's fully distributed. We use a blockchain to coordinate the learning. But each of these devices will need to have their own neural network, but of the same copy. And then in every cycle, a few cycles of the training, all the neural network weights are then by the blockchain extracted from each of these members of the swarm, and then average. And then the average number is sent back to everyone. And it turns out that when we did this, eventually every device were as smart as the other, right? Because the problem with doing it in distributed ways, each device is collecting their own data, but it's not seeing the global data. That's the whole point. You want to partition them, right? But then if it only trains on its own private data, it wouldn't have enough data, or it might be biased, right? Given only collecting from that point. But with swarm learning and blockchain, where you don't share any of these data, you only share the neural network weights, yeah, right? We've shown that eventually after training using swarm learning, all the devices were as good in accuracy as though you took all that data from all the devices, collected it at the cloud, and trained it as a single bulk here. So yes, your point is a great one.
Yeah,
looking at ways to solve it. Yeah.
We had just we have 6 minutes to finish, and there is 2 questions in the chat. Can you answer the question in the chat? Can you read, or did you want that I?
Let me see. Maybe you.
The first one is what about the quantum computing and non-traditional platform for the new challenge in HPC?
Yeah, for quantum computing, we are not doing the research ourselves. We have been investing in companies that are working on them, because there are so many ways to achieve quantum processing, right? Today, my first question is always asked, what quantum mechanics principles are you using for your quantum computer, right? So of course, superimposition and entanglement are the big ones, but there are other devices that are using tunneling, sorry, and many other techniques, right? Optical way of doing things. Right? So that's the first question. So we are looking at all of them and looking at the ones that have the highest potential. And then once you pick one of these quantum mechanics principles that you're using to apply to do processing, the next question I always ask, how are you achieving it, right? In superimposition and entanglement, there are people who are using, atom level, there are people using electrons, there are people using ions, right? So these are, again, the next level of looking at who do you think will best achieve first, lowest noise qubits, right? And therefore need the least number of other qubits to do error correction. That's fundamentally it. If I were to just try to summarize to the fewest words possible, right? Least noisy, right? Highest fidelity, again, high fidelity qubit, and therefore the least number of correcting qubits needed, right? And that's as much I think I can say in terms of our investment. Yeah.
There is another question about the leverage 5G evolution as access network for IoT.
Yes. That's very much it. So autonomous cars, you've seen, there are two parts to that industry. Let's just use the industry as an example. In fact, there are two parts to it. The autonomy part that is self-driving, ultimately getting to level 5, right? But I believe full level 5 in production and the commercial level will be still some years out, right? And we're working with companies towards that. A lot of data collection there. But the other area that's sooner is the concept of connected cars. The two will work together eventually, right? But I believe connected cars will come first. Highly connected cars will come first. Today, a Formula 1 car is about 300 sensors. Soon, when you buy a car, right? You will have 300 sensors roughly in it. And likely the manufacturer will be paying for a 5G chip in it, right? To collect the data and send it up to the factory. Of course, you can approve, disapprove, and stop it. Yeah, we'll come up. There will be different regulations around it, right? That's one of the ways, right? Collecting all this data, and then you are allowed to sell that data, right? And because you collected it, you're allowed to sell it. And while we have come up with a technique called a system with Continental called data monetization platform, where as you are driving, all your sensors in a car, like for example, shock absorber is sensing a pothole, right? For example. It can actually sell that new pothole information that's not on other maps back to the car, maybe half a kilometer behind, right? And get a small credit of maybe half a cent or something. So these are some of the capability that will be brought about when 5G comes along, right? But do note, right? There is no magic, right? It's just physics, right? 5G has so much more bandwidth, mainly because there's a lot more signal transducers around, right? Yeah, and its distances are much shorter, right? You know, to get that much bandwidth, it shortens the distance, and therefore you have a lot more signal towers, right? That's why street lamps are becoming important.
Very well. Thank you very much. We are on time. Thank you for your talk. Very interesting talk. And thank you also for HP Enterprise to sponsor our conference. Just a little, excuse me, just at the beginning for the mistake with your name, the little mistake.
Not a
thank
problem.
you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. See you then. Bye.
Bye-bye. Let's continue.
Okay, thank you very much, Philippe, and thank you very much, Dr. Eng Lim Goh from HP. So now, in 1 minute, we have, okay, now we have the next speaker, Don Federico Silla, Dr. Federico Silla. He is a PhD for the computer engineering from Universidad Politécnica de Valencia in Spain. He's currently full professor of the Department of Computer Engineering at the same university. He worked for 2 years at Intel Corporation. Also, he is coordinator of the rCUDA project. That is an interesting project and very useful about the remote GPU virtualization since 2018. So also he has author of more 100 papers in conference, journal, book chapters. He has been member of program committees in many of the most prestigious conferences in this area, including CCGrid, PAT, ISCA, ICS, Micro, and so on. And also, he is associate editor of the JPDC Journal Science 2015. So welcome, Dr. Federico Silla.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen.
Okay.
Okay, I hope everybody can listen, can hear to me, and can see my screen. Is that right? Is that okay?
Yes, it's okay. It's okay. Thank you.
Perfect. So, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm going to talk about GPU virtualization, or more specifically about remote GPU virtualization, which is a special instance of GPU virtualization. And I'm going to focus on the technology that we have created in our university, which is the rCUDA middleware. rCUDA is just a technology for using remote GPUs, remote CUDA GPUs, as I will explain next. So I would like to begin with some motivation about how are we using GPUs. So in this slide, we can see the profiling of 2 different applications. We can see in the upper part of the slide, the profiling for the CUDA-MEME application, and in the lower part, the profiling for the GPU Blast application. So what we can see in the plots is, on one hand, we can see the amount of GPU memory that is being used along the execution time of the application. We have the execution time on the x-axis. And we can also see in red the GPU utilization, and in blue the average GPU utilization. So we can see, for instance, that for the CUDA application, the memory used in the GPU is about 120 megabytes for this data set. Obviously, every application is different and every data set is different. For this particular data set, the CUDA application is using 120 megabytes, and average GPU utilization is less than 40%. So on the other hand, on the bottom part of the slide, we can see something similar for GPU Blast. In this case, the application lasts for more than 70 seconds for this particular data set. We have chosen small data sets in order to make a beta sample. And we can see that GPU utilization for this application is 100% for some periods of time, and for some other periods of times, there is almost no GPU utilization. So there are periods when the GPU is used 100% of the time, and there are periods when the GPU is not used because the CPU is doing some work and preparing data and so on. So at the end, the average GPU utilization is about 33–35%. We can see something similar with these two other applications, with CUDA SW application and with the LAMPS simulator. In this case, both applications use the GPU 100% of the time for most of the execution time. The LAMPS application is the one that uses the GPU in a more intense way. And the LAMPS application achieves 90% of GPU utilization for this particular data set. In the case of the CUDA SW application, we can see that GPU utilization is slightly higher, average GPU utilization is slightly higher than 70%. So we can see that these applications doesn't make 100% GPU utilization of the resources. However, taking into account that this is only an example, these are only 4 applications and every application is different. But at the end, what my message is that many applications don't use the GPU 100% of the time. What happens if we put these 4 applications into a data center? So we can run these applications for 1 hour. So we have a similar plot. In the x-axis, we can see time, and at the end we have 1 hour. And we have 4 different workload intensities. In the upper part of the slide, we have the smallest or the lowest system load. We launch the different applications, they are chosen randomly, and we allow for some space, for some time between application and application, between 2 consecutive applications. So if this would simulate, or this would model a data center that is not heavily loaded. If we increase the GPU, if we increase the system load, this is only just by reducing the waiting time between the moment that an application completes execution and the moment that the next application is launched, we can see that GPU utilization is slightly increased. As we increase system load to high or maximum, in the maximum case, we don't have any waiting period. As soon as an application completes execution, we immediately start the execution of the next application. So as we increase workload, we can see that GPU utilization, average GPU utilization increases. But here the issue is that even for the maximum system load, in the bottom part of the slide, we can see that GPU utilization for these 4 applications that we are using as an example, GPU utilization is only 50%, which is not too much. GPUs are expensive, and we are spending a lot of resources on them. And once we use them for these applications, we just get 50% of GPU utilization. For some other applications, obviously, we may have higher GPU utilizations, or we may have lower GPU utilizations. Remember that this is only an example. So at the end, we have the GPUs in our cluster. GPUs are not fully used typically. And then the question is how we can increase the utilization of the GPUs that we have installed in our cluster. So our proposal is that GPU utilization can be increased by 2 means. The first one is by virtualizing the GPU. Virtualization is a very known technique In the case of CPUs, in the case of virtual machines, everybody understands, everybody knows that once you use several virtual machines in the same host, the utilization of your resources increases. So this is the same. If we virtualize a GPU, then use, and this is the second part, and use that GPU concurrently among several applications, then we can increase GPU utilization. So the key here is these two words, virtualizing the GPU and sharing the GPU among different applications at the same time. So in this way, we can achieve GPU utilizations closer to 100%. So basically, this is our proposal, and this is the motivation I wanted to share with you. Now the question is, if we share the GPU among different applications, which is the performance penalty? Because obviously, if you use your GPU only with one application, all the GPU is available for that application. However, as you increase the sharing degree of that GPU among more and more applications, those applications will multiplex. And then each of the applications may see some degradation on the performance. So we have here 5 different applications. We have an example that shows how much degradation we can expect for this application. We have LAMPS, CUDA-MEME, Barracuda, Mummer GPU, and GPU Leaf SVM. And we can see normalized execution time. In black, we have the execution time with when only one application is running on the GPU. Then we have in gray, in dark gray, normalized execution time when 2 instances of the application are concurrently executing in the same GPU. And in light gray, we have the execution time when we have 4 instances at the same time in the same GPU. So we can see that for the LAMPS application, when we move from one application, one instance of the application to 4 instances of the application, execution time is not 4 times the normalized execution time, it's just twice. So it seems that there is not a big penalty. For the rest of the applications, we have something similar. For the CUDA-MEME application, for instance, we can see that when we concurrently run 4 instances of the application at the same time in the GPU, normalized execution time is lower than 1.5. In the case of the GPU Leaf SVM, execution time is basically the same. And there is here one important detail. Why for the Barracuda application we only have the bar for 1 instance, and why for the Mummer GPU application we only have the bars for 1 instance and 2 instances? The answer is because of GPU memory occupation. As we can see here, Barracuda uses, these numbers were got with a K20 GPU that had 5 gigs of memory, and Barracuda uses more than 3 gigs of memory. So we cannot put more than 1 instance of Barracuda in the GPU at the same time. And something similar happens with Mummer GPU. Mummer GPU uses about 2 gigs of memory, and therefore only 2 instances of the application fit into the GPU at the same time. So at the end, we can conclude that according to these examples, because I repeat, this is only an example, every application is different, so numbers will be different. But for these 5 applications, we can see that executing or sharing the GPU among several applications doesn't cause a large penalty on performance. And the second conclusion of this slide is that sharing the GPU among several applications has a limit. The limit in this case is the amount of memory that the application requires and the amount of memory that is available on the GPU. So at the end, for my motivation, the key issue is that we can share, or it looks like it is a good decision to share the GPU among several applications at the same time. So now we can go into the question about rCUDA. What's rCUDA? Okay, all of you probably know about CUDA. CUDA is just a language or an extension of C in order to use GPUs. Here in this slide, we can see a node with 3 GPUs, and the application uses the CUDA libraries in order to access the GPUs and in order to submit kernels to the GPU and move data to and from the GPU. Now the question is, what happens if there are no GPU in the system? If we don't have any GPU in the system, then the result is obvious. We cannot execute the application. But let's do something more. We are engineers, we are scientists, so why should we be happy with this answer? Just as a side note, what happens with a network file system? Here in the slide, we can see some nodes that they use a remote network file system across the network. This file system is not inside the nodes, but this file system is used remotely from the nodes. And the applications that are used in the nodes have the feeling that the file system is inside the node. Basically, we are remoting the file system. So why not doing something similar with the GPUs? This is actually what rCUDA does. rCUDA allows nodes that doesn't have a GPU to use GPUs that are present, that are located in other nodes of the cluster, and rCUDA does so across the network. It's like extending the PCI Express bus from the nodes without GPUs to the nodes with GPUs. Obviously, rCUDA is much more complex than extending the PCI Express bus, but basically this is the idea. So rCUDA, that stands for Remote CUDA, basically allows you to use the GPUs in your cluster from nodes that doesn't have a GPU. Or in general, rCUDA allows applications to use remote GPUs that are located in other nodes of the cluster. Additionally, this is very important. Additionally, GPUs can be shared. So if we have, for instance, 9 nodes with without GPUs, and then we have one application in each node, then we will have 9 different applications that are concurrently using the available GPUs. We may have 1 application per node, 2 applications per node, whatever. As far as the memory of the node is available to feed all the memory, all the application requirements, we can run more and more applications. And also, as far as the memory in the GPU is available for the application and we have enough memory, then we can share the GPUs more and more. How does rCUDA work? So here we have the basics of rCUDA. rCUDA is designed in 2 different parts, the client part and the server part. The client side is just a library that is provided to the application instead of the CUDA library. So you run the CUDA application. There is an important issue here. The application doesn't need to be changed. You don't have to change the source code of your application. So the same application you have and you are using with CUDA, you can use it with rCUDA. Then instead of linking the application against the CUDA library provided by NVIDIA, you link the application against the rCUDA library in the nodes without GPUs. In the server node, in the nodes with the GPU, you just run the CUDA server. The CUDA server is a CUDA program that is a daemon, and then this daemon is waiting for CUDA requests from the nodes without GPU. So as soon as the application executes a CUDA call, the CUDA call is forwarded by the rCUDA client to the rCUDA server. The rCUDA server forwards the call to the GPU. There is executed, and then the results are sent back to the application. Basically, the application doesn't notice anything except some delay. Obviously, accessing the remote GPU has higher delay than accessing the local GPU. Later, we will see some performance numbers, and we will put this into context. rCUDA can be used with several networks. Basically, rCUDA supports TCP/IP and InfiniBand and RoCE. Basically, InfiniBand and RoCE are the same. rCUDA can be extended to more communication modules, to more networks, but as we have limited human resources, we have only worked with TCP/IP and InfiniBand and RoCE. So at the end, rCUDA is changing the vision of the cluster. Basically, in the upper part of the slide, we have the traditional cluster architecture. We have several nodes. Each node, in this case, has 2 CPUs. Each node has a single GPU. They may have more than 1 GPU. In this example, they have only 1 GPU. And the nodes are interconnected by some kind of network, Ethernet, InfiniBand, whatever. With rCUDA, the physical configuration of the network is not changed. rCUDA is just a software layer. What is changed is the logical configuration of the cluster. The cluster now has a pool. With rCUDA, the cluster now has a pool of GPUs that are detached from the nodes, and these GPUs can be used from any node of the cluster. And any node of the cluster can use any of the GPUs and can use any number of GPUs. So basically, it's like detaching the GPUs from the servers so that they are available to any of the nodes that are present in the cluster. So how does this work? Before entering into performance numbers and so on, how rCUDA is deployed in a cluster? Deploying rCUDA in a cluster is very easy. Imagine that we have some nodes. In this case, we have 5 nodes with GPUs. And in this example, we have a node without GPU. So the first thing we have to do is setting the daemon of rCUDA in the nodes with GPUs. So this is a CUDA program. So probably we should export the LD library path variable in order to provide the path to CUDA to the rCUDA daemon. Once this is done, then we have to set the client side. This is more tricky. In order to set the client side, first we have to export the LD library path environment variable so that it points to the rCUDA library. Once we have done that, we can say that the application will access 8 GPUs. You can see that we have in total, in this example, 8 GPUs. And once we have decided that the application will access 8 GPUs, we only have to say where each of the GPUs is. So GPU 0 is the one available in node 1. GPU 1 is the first of the GPUs in node 2. GPU 2 is the second GPU in node 2, and so on. And now, once we have set these variables, we can launch the CUDA application as always. We execute the CUDA application, and rCUDA, the rCUDA library that is linked against the application instead of using the NVIDIA library, will contact the different servers and will forward the CUDA calls to each of the application, to each of the GPUs. So in this case, the application will see that it has available 8 GPUs. The application doesn't know that the GPUs are not in the local node. The application just uses those GPUs and it gets the results, and everything is working as always. We have developed an interesting tool, which is what we call rCUDA SMI. It's just basically the same as the NVIDIA SMI, but instead of using local GPUs, it uses remote GPUs. So we can see that for this example, we have the different GPUs in the different nodes of the sample, and it provides similar information to the NVIDIA NVIDIA SMI application, but instead of using the local GPUs, it uses the remote GPUs that are provided to the application. So now we have the knowledge about what is rCUDA, how rCUDA is used. You have seen that it's very, very easy. Now it's important to talk about performance, because we are replacing the PCI Express link by the network. So the network should be fast enough in order to provide similar bandwidth and similar performance as the PCI Express link. Here we have some numbers. Here we are comparing the performance of applications run with CUDA in the K40 or the K20 GPU with the application of using rCUDA in a remote K40 using InfiniBand EDR, or in a remote K20 using InfiniBand FDR. So you can see that we have several applications, and in general, performance when using the local or the remote GPU is quite similar. So here in the upper part of the slide, we have the overhead of using rCUDA. You can see that for some applications like CUDA SW, the overhead of using rCUDA is very small. For some other applications, the overhead of using rCUDA is bigger when you use InfiniBand FDR. InfiniBand FDR is just about 56 gigs per second, and then performance will be much lower, or will be lower than when you use faster networks. If you use InfiniBand EDR, then the overhead is less than 2%. Here we have the Magma application and the Barracuda application. Here the overhead is lower than 0. This means that the application will execute faster with rCUDA than with CUDA. That is, the application will execute faster when using a remote GPU when using when using a local GPU. How can this be? Well, we achieve higher transfers, higher bandwidth when we are transferring data to the remote GPU than CUDA, and also we have some synchronizations that for some combinations are made faster than CUDA. Actually, when we got these numbers, we didn't believe that, so we repeat the execution several times, and we were digging and digging in order to know the reasons for these better results. So at the end, the important issue here is that for some applications, performance will be similar. For some other applications, depending on the bandwidth provided by the network, the application may experience a high overhead or just a negligible overhead. And for some other applications, depending on the exact combination of CUDA calls and amount of computing in the remote GPU, the application may be run even faster than with the local GPU. Here we have numbers for the P100 GPU with InfiniBand EDR, and in general, you can see that using CUDA or using rCUDA with the application provides similar performance. The overhead of using rCUDA is very, very low. So how can be that some applications run even faster with rCUDA, or how can it be that the overhead of using rCUDA is so small? Here, an important ingredient to that small overhead is transferring data to the remote GPU, basically doing a data copy from host memory to GPU memory. Here we have the two different cases. In the left side of the slide, we have the case when we are moving data with CUDA in the traditional way. Data is in the host memory, and data is moved to the GPU across the PCI Express bus, and everything happens inside the node. When we are moving data with rCUDA from one node to the remote rCUDA server in the right part of the slide, we can see that memory is located in the, data is located in the memory of the client node. And when we move data to the remote GPU, that data has to cross the network, arrives to the remote server, and there the data has to move from the InfiniBand card or from the network card to the GPU located in that server. So we can measure performance, we can measure bandwidth in both cases. We will focus on pageable memory because pageable memory is the memory typically used by applications. So here we have the performance when we are moving data to the GPU, and when we are moving data from the GPU, from the device to the host, for three different GPU generations, the K40, the P100, and the V100. You can see that when we are moving data with the local GPU, with the K40, performance is pretty low. It's about 2 gigs per second, despite that the PCI Express 3 link provides much better performance. When we use a CUDA P100 GPU, performance is much higher, and when we use the V100 GPU, performance is slightly lower. When we move data back from the GPU to the host memory, then we have this data. The K40 provides very bad performance, and the P100 and the V100 provides similar performance. Which is the performance with rCUDA? I will provide later data about the current version of rCUDA, but basically we released in July a new version of rCUDA, which is a big step forward in our development. So these numbers in red were achieved with the previous version of rCUDA. So performance with the previous version of rCUDA were these ones. When we are comparing performance in the K40, we can see that we move data to the GPU much faster than CUDA, and we move data from the GPU much faster than CUDA. However, when we moved to P100 GPUs and V100 GPUs, performance is much worse. In this case, performance is lower than CUDA in both cases. With the new version of our CUDA that we released in July, we can see these numbers. When we move data to and from the GPU, we get better performance than CUDA. So as we are achieving more data, as we are getting more performance in the data transfers with CUDA, then it is possible to get better performance for our CUDA, for the application, than when we are using CUDA. Obviously, this is done thanks to InfiniBand. If we are using 1 gig Ethernet, performance will drop. 1 gig Ethernet will provide much lower performance. So we basically consider high performance interconnect for our CUDA. In the case that we move data from one GPU to another, we have similar performance numbers. In the case that we move data in the CUDA case from one GPU to the other GPU, then data is moved across the local PCI Express bus. When we are moving data with our CUDA, we have two scenarios. Both remote GPUs are in the same remote node, or in the lower part of the slide, the remote GPUs are located in different remote nodes. The interesting scenario is the second one, because in the first one, in the upper part, moving data across the PCI Express bus is just the same as with CUDA. The interesting scenario is the second one, when GPUs are located in different nodes of the cluster. So in this case, we can see similar numbers as the ones I presented, in this case for K20, K40, and P100. And we can see that when we move data between GPUs located in different nodes of the cluster, performance of our CUDA is at least the same or better than the performance of CUDA. So this is why performance of applications using our CUDA is not much lower than performance of applications using native CUDA. At the end, using our CUDA provides an overhead or creates an overhead of 2–5% in average, depending on the application. So which are the benefits of our CUDA? There are several benefits. One of the benefits is providing many GPUs for an application, and the second of the benefits, or a second benefit, could be providing better throughput for the cluster. Let's take a look for the first one. We can provide with our CUDA many GPUs for an application. Remember that we are detaching the GPUs of the cluster with our CUDA, and then we can provide all those GPUs to a single node. So this is what we can see here. We can see here that with CUDA, we run the Monte Carlo multi-GPU simulator with up to 4 GPUs available in a single node. But with our CUDA, we were able, in this example, to provide 14 GPUs to the same application. In this example, we can see that with our CUDA, we provided 64 GPUs to a single application. In this case, the application was a device query, but it could be any kind of simulator or any kind of application. In case of we have rendering, we can also do something similar. If we have to render this picture with Blender, for instance, Blender will provide a part of the picture to each of the GPUs available. So in this case, we can see that as we reduce the amount of we increase the amount of GPUs provided to Blender, the execution time or the rendering time is noticeably reduced. So we can also see another benefit of our CUDA. We can see how cluster throughput is increased. Here we can, this scenario, we have several nodes with our GPUs, and we have one or more CUDA boxes that can serve multiple clients. So in this way, the key is that GPUs, in addition to be virtualized with CUDA, they can be shared among different applications. The limit of GPU sharing is the memory available in the GPU, as I mentioned before. For this experiment, we used Slurm in order to schedule the execution of the applications. And we used our cluster, which is a node cluster, but it's what we have. It is composed of 16 nodes with 1 GPU in each node and the Slurm scheduler in an additional node. So at the end, we had two different sets of application. Set 1 is composed of application with short execution time, and set 2 is composed of application with long execution time. So we made three kinds of workloads: applications only from set 1, applications only from set 2, or application from both sets. At the end, we had sets of 400 jobs in order to fulfill the queues of Slurm. And here we can see the numbers. In gray, we have the execution, the performance with CUDA, and in black, we have the execution time with rCUDA. So we can see that execution time with rCUDA is reduced with respect to using CUDA for the three sets that we created. In the case of energy used to run the workloads, we can see that in the three cases, energy is also reduced. And here we can see that GPU utilization is also increased. In the case of the workload 2, it is increased up to 50% for this example, for these exact applications. Why are we improving performance? Basically, we are improving performance because when we have several applications that are sharing a GPU, those applications will submit kernels to the GPUs. So we have this GPU blast application that we have profiled before. And you can see that for this execution time, the GPU is used, and then the GPU will be executing the kernels or the kernel for this application. But for the time this application is not submitting kernels to the GPU, if we are not sharing the GPU among different applications, then the GPU is wasted during this amount of time. However, if we are sharing the GPU among different applications, during this period of time that this application is not submitting kernels, then kernels from other applications will be executed by the GPU. So at the end, we are compacting all the kernels, and then the GPU is making much more work for us. This is something similar here. Here we can see the normalized execution time for different sets of the workload similar to the ones I presented before. In green, we have the normalized execution time of each of the sets. In blue, we have the normalized GPU allocation time. Some applications in the work set, in the workloads are not using the GPU. So at the end, in blue is the time that applications using the GPU are scheduled to be executing the nodes. But in orange, we have the GPU utilization. We can see in the plot that GPU utilization is much lower than the normalized execution time or the normalized GPU allocation time that we have in the sample. So this is why we are increasing performance with rCUDA, because when we are not using rCUDA, all this time is wasted. When we are using rCUDA, all this time is fulfilled with other applications, with kernels from other applications. rCUDA can also be used for virtual machines. In this case, we can use PCI Express pass-through, or we can use the new vGPU technology by NVIDIA. At the end, it's basically the same. In the case of PCI pass-through, in the case of KVM, for instance, we have the GPU, we have several virtual machines in the node, and then only one of the virtual machines can be assigned the GPU, because the PCI Express pass-through technology, it provides the GPU only to one of the virtual machines. So how can we share? How can we provide the GPU to all the virtual machines? With rCUDA, it's very easy. We install the rCUDA client inside the virtual machines. We install the rCUDA server in a different server or even in the host. And then in this way, all the applications, all the virtual machines can share the GPU that is provided to them by the rCUDA server. So here we have some performance numbers. We can see the performance with CUDA. The performance with CUDA This is native CUDA with our virtual machine. The performance with CUDA when used from inside the virtual machine, and the performance with rCUDA when used from inside the virtual machine. And we can see that for some applications, using PCI pass-through increases execution time, as for the CUDA meme. And when we are using rCUDA, execution time slightly increases again. For some other applications, performance numbers are different. In the case of GPU Blast and CUDA SW, performance is basically the same. And for LAMPs, the increase on execution time is very small. Also, we can share the GPU among different applications. If we have only CUDA, if we don't have rCUDA, if we have 4 GPUs in the system, we can assign a virtual machine to each of the GPUs. So in this case, we can provide service to 4 virtual machines at the same time. With rCUDA, we can do the same. We can assign a single virtual machine to each of the GPUs, or we can do more. As we can share the GPUs among applications or among virtual machines, we can assign 2 or even 3 or more GPUs to each of the virtual machines to each of the GPUs. So in this way, we can provide more service to applications. Here we have some numbers. In the case we are using PCI pass-through with 4 virtual machines, here we have this execution time. As we increase the sharing degree with rCUDA, we can see that even for 12 virtual machines is not 3 times the time of the original execution time. So it is worth to share the applications, to share the GPUs. In the case of completed jobs, we have something similar. In the case of amount of completed jobs from the virtual machines, we can see that as we increase the amount of virtual machines, the amount of completed jobs is also increased. So at the end, using rCUDA is really worth. If we use vGPU by NVIDIA, it's something similar. In this case, we have several applications. You can see the details of the applications in the slides. And here we can see that when using native CUDA, using virtual GPU or vGPU by NVIDIA, or using rCUDA, performance execution time is similar when we use a small, medium, or large data set. So at the end, the conclusion of this slide, of this set of slides, is that performance of application is not really decreased when we are using rCUDA. We can use also we can do also GPU job migration. In this case, we can move the GPU part of the application between GPUs in the cluster. Imagine we have an application that is using GPUs in nodes B and node C. So at some point in time, the scheduler, for instance, decides that the GPU part in node B has to be moved to node A in order to switch off node B, for instance. So with rCUDA, what we can do is, in a transparent way to the application, moving the GPU part of the application from node B to node A. So what is this useful for? We can use this for server consolidation. In the left side of the slide, we have several nodes of the cluster, and we have the GPU utilization of each of these nodes. We can see that GPU utilization for some of the nodes is blue. This is a nice GPU utilization. And for some other nodes of the cluster, GPU utilization is very, very small. So what we could do is moving those applications from the nodes with lower GPU utilization to other servers and switch off those servers. And this is what we have in the right side of the slide. We have several nodes that have been switched off, and their jobs have been moved to the nodes that are switched on. So this is what we can see in this example. In this example, we have 2 applications in these 2 nodes. Each of them are using a remote GPU. And in this particular example, at second 55, the scheduler decides to migrate one of the applications, decides to consolidate. So the first of the nodes is the application being run in the first of the node is moved to the second of the nodes. Here we can see this with some plots. The source GPU is executing the application, and at seconds 55, it is moved to the second of the GPUs. So the GPU utilization of the second of the GPUs increases. And if we take a look at energy, at power, we can see how using both applications in the same GPU, which is a GPU 0 plus 1, the green bars, doesn't increase power at all. Basically, performance is similar and the energy is similar. We can do also load balancing. In this case, for some reasons, some applications are sharing a GPU, and then if we use GPU migration, we can move the GPU part of the applications to different nodes in order that we balance the load in the cluster. An interesting issue about rCUDA is that it increases heterogeneity in the cluster. Basically, rCUDA can be used or can be compiled for ARM, Intel, and IBM Power systems. So at the end, we can have applications in ARM systems using the GPUs located in IBM Power systems or using the GPUs located in Intel systems, or we can have any combination in general of machines or architectures in the client side and any combination of architecture within the server side. And finally, let me show you a brief status, a brief comment about how rCUDA is doing and which is our near-term improvements to this technology. Basically, we have been working for many years in this technology, and the best solution, the best version we produced in the past was version 16.11 in 2016 in November. So that version was focused only on HPC applications. Deep learning was starting at that time, so we didn't focus on deep learning. That version had very good performance. That version had no support for Slurm and had initial support for migration. So from that point in time, we were working very hard in order to introduce support for deep learning frameworks in rCUDA, as well as renderers. So at the beginning of the year 2018, we released a new version of rCUDA that provided support for deep learning frameworks. The problem with this version was that performance was not brilliant, and support for Slurm was not provided yet. Some months later, at the end of year 2018, we made a less improvement to this version, but performance was not brilliant again. So we have been working very hard since the beginning of year 2019 until last July, and we have released the recent version of rCUDA 2007. This version makes use of a completely new internal architecture, makes use of a completely new communication layer, and now performance is intended, is supposed, we have not measured performance yet, but it is supposed to be much better because we have changed all the internal architecture of rCUDA in order to provide much better performance. In this new version, we provide support for Slurm, we provide support for containers, and we don't provide support for migration yet. Migration was an experiment. We expect by the end of this year to provide support for CUDA 10. Current version is only providing support for CUDA 9. And we will provide also support for multi-tenancy, and we will provide even better communication performance. And next year, we expect to provide support for CUDA 11 and provide a new rCUDA GPU scheduler that we are completing. And that's all. If you are interested, about the rCUDA technology, you can ask for a copy of it in our website, and we will provide it for free. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Federico. That's an excellent presentation. A lot of questions here for the people. There are some questions that they have in the Q&A window, but another question comes from the social media that we have in YouTube. So for the first one, Do you know if there are yet existing real HPC center large-scale platforms that integrate rCUDA with Slurm?
Sorry, say the question again.
Do you know if there are existing real HPC centers that integrate rCUDA with Slurm?
Not yet. Not yet. Basically, the problem is that we are inside the university, and my university provides rCUDA as it is, with the bugs and without the bugs. So users usually require some guarantees about the performance or about the behavior of rCUDA. And my university is not eager to provide any kind of guarantees because we are not a company, we are only a university. So what we are doing is that we are working with some companies in order to provide rCUDA to them so that they provide rCUDA to customers. And in this way, these companies will be the front end for us. And in this way, we may provide some kind of guarantees thanks to these intermediate companies. But at this point, there is no installation using rCUDA yet. A big installation, small installations are using, but big installations are not using rCUDA because of the lack of guarantee.
Okay, thank you. The other one, how could big kiwis handle it? I mean, how can rCUDA know if there are free resources on the GPU for attacks, or is it should keep waiting?
Yes, basically, rCUDA doesn't know that. rCUDA is in this way similar to CUDA. Thus, if you have several applications in a computer and you want to run those applications at the same time, will you have a problem with GPU memory occupancy? Probably. Depends on the amount of memory used or required by each of the applications. If you are not using a resource scheduler, like a Slurm, for instance, then this is a lottery. This is why we created the GPU scheduler within rCUDA, which is not available yet, will be available next year. In this way, this scheduler will be integrated with Slurm, so that users of Slurm will be able to use virtual GPUs provided by rCUDA without changing anything in the installation, just introducing rCUDA and that's all. Once you use our GPU scheduler, then you will be able to, you make sure that no application runs out of memory.
Okay, the other question, in your experience, is it possible to deploy rCUDA in containers?
Yes, it is possible. We are working with some research groups here in the university, and they are working with containers. So actually, thanks to that collaboration, we improved some small details in rCUDA in order to make safe the use of rCUDA with containers.
Okay, another one. What is the network if is slingshot by Cray, which is based on TCP/IP? Will it work with rCUDA natively?
No, we don't support. We don't provide support for slingshot by Cray. We only provide support for TCP/IP and for InfiniBand. If that network is compatible with TCP/IP, then rCUDA could be used with that network. I understand that performance will be lower than the case when that network is used natively, but currently we don't provide support for that network.
Okay, the other one. Suppose you have an hybrid architecture with internal and remote GPUs. Is there a dynamic way to decide if it's better to run your code inside your box with limited GPUs instead of sending it to a remote, more powerful GPUs infrastructure?
With rCUDA alone, it is not possible to do so. With rCUDA and the GPU scheduler that we will release next year, it is possible. This is just one more policy of the scheduler.
Okay. There another one, that how big is the impact for rCUDA if instead of InfiniBand, the communication is through Ethernet 10, 25, 100 gigabit?
There will be some impact. According to our experiments, if you provide at least 20 gigs per second, then performance is not bad. However, you have to notice that you are replacing the PCI Express bus. The PCI Express 3 runs at 15 gigs per second. This is about 100 gigabits per second. So you are replacing the PCI Express bus by a lower network, by a lower speed network. So going 10 times lower will impact performance. However, you have to notice one thing. This is very important. Applications are not only transferring data all the time. Basically, no application exists that is transferring data all the time. Applications execute kernels. So the longer kernels are being executed and the lower transfers are done by the application, the lower will be the impact. Basically, the less your application uses the network, the lower will be the impact. So we have even achieved good performance with 1 gig Ethernet for some applications that transfer small amounts of data and made a lot of computations with that small amount of data.
Okay, thank you very much. There are another final question from the YouTube observers now. That I mean, question that as user that we have, why the dramatic difference in performance when we change GPU families, for example, in the Kepler and Volta families?
Yes, this is very interesting. I think that NVIDIA did much better when moving to higher or to newer families of GPUs. Basically, our experience is that the driver, the NVIDIA driver, is the one that makes most of the things. Obviously, the GPU computes, but the driver is the master of the universe in this way. No, it's between the application and the GPU. So our feeling is that the driver, when using Kepler, was much worse than the driver that we have now, or the driver that NVIDIA has now. For instance, we have seen a very huge performance improvement in data copies. I have shown that at the beginning of the presentation in some slide. That was very, very interesting for us. Here, you can see that the 3 of the GPUs use PCI Express 3, the K40, the P100, and the P100. So you can see that the K40 performance for moving data to and from the GPU was about 2 gigs per second, 2 gigabits per second. But and in this case, we are also using PCI Express 3 as well as when we are using P100 and P100. These plots are tricky because in our experience, the performance, the exact performance when you move vegetable memory not only depends on the GPU, but also depends on the host memory speed and on the processor speed. But you can see that in the case for K40, performance is much lower. Why? We don't know. The NVIDIA driver is a black box. So we think that when NVIDIA moved from K40 to P100, NVIDIA improved data transfer improved data transfers a lot.
Okay, thank you very much, Federico. It's a very, very interesting conference, this talk. There are just a last question for one of the observers in YouTube. Where we can find rCUDA and how we can use rCUDA as collaborator.
You can find rCUDA in our website, www.rcuda.net. So we have a request form there. rCUDA, you cannot download rCUDA. You ask for rCUDA, and then we provide rCUDA to people that ask for it. Basically, we are funded by public funding, and we need to know who is using rCUDA in order to report that uses to the government in order to get more funding, right? So this is why rCUDA cannot be directly downloaded, but must be requested. And in order to collaborate with us, you can send me an email directly to me. My email address is not in the slide, But if you go to our website, you can see there an info email address. If you write to that info email address, which is info@rCUDA.net, that email will reach me, so I will answer it.
Thank you very much, Federico. Thank you for this excellent talk. You're welcome here in Latin America, maybe next time after this pandemic situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
So for the rest of the attendees, we followed in 1 hour by the same channel. Thank you very much to attend this morning. It's still morning that is very interesting. And we start at 2 p.m. with the track on artificial intelligence using HPC in 1 hour. Thank you very much and see you soon.